The rifle barrel pressed cold against Caleb Warren's temple as three Apache warriors surrounded his cabin at dawn. In his arms, he held their starving boy, the child he'd saved 4 days ago. Now the reason they might kill him. "You took what is ours," the eldest warrior growled in broken English. But Caleb didn't flinch. Instead, he did something that shocked them all. He lowered his own gun and stepped aside, opening his door wider. "The boy needed help. Come inside, all of you." That split-second decision would transform a lonely rancher's life forever. Stay with me, friends, as I tell you this remarkable story of how enemies became family in the harsh Arizona territory. And hey, drop a comment about where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these tales travel. The morning wind cut through the Arizona territory like a blade sharpened on desert stone, carrying with it the promise of another bitter winter day in 1882. Caleb Warren pulled his worn coat tighter as he saddled his horse, the leather creaking in protest against the cold. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, each one disappearing as quickly as his reasons for getting up each morning since Martha died. "Come on, Buck," he muttered to the bay gelding, his voice rough from disuse. Days could pass without him speaking to another soul, and he preferred it that way. The horse nickered softly, understanding the routine better than most humans ever could. They had work to do, fences to check, cattle to count, and the endless task of keeping a ranch running with only ghosts for company. The ranch sprawled across 40 acres of stubborn land that fought him for every blade of grass, every drop of water. Caleb had bought it with Martha 8 years ago, back when dreams seemed as endless as the Arizona sky. They'd planned to fill it with children's laughter to build something that would last generations. Now it stood as a monument to plans that died with her during that last brutal childbirth that took both mother and baby. He mounted Buck with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. The fence line stretched toward the mountains, a thin barrier between his ordered world and the wilderness beyond. Most ranchers in these parts rode their boundaries armed and ready for trouble. Apache raids Mexican bandits claimed jumpers. Caleb carried his Winchester out of habit more than fear. Death had already taken what mattered most. Everything else was just marking time. The sun climbed slowly, painting the frost-covered sage and mesquite in shades of silver and gold. Any other man might have found beauty in it, but Caleb saw only the work ahead. A section of fence near Skull Rock had been giving him trouble for weeks post working loose in the sandy soil. He'd need to reset them before his few remaining cattle found the gap. Buck picked his way carefully through the rough terrain hooves, finding purchase on paths they'd traveled countless times. Caleb let the horse have his head, trusting the animal's instincts, while his own mind wandered to the supplies he'd need from town next week. Coffee was running low and the flour barrel was near empty. The thought of riding into Prescott, of facing the pitying looks and well-meaning questions made his jaw clench. "Mr. Warren, how you holding up?" they'd ask, as if the answer might have changed since last month. "Fine," he'd say, loading his wagon as quickly as possible. "You know the widow Henderson has been asking after you." Someone would inevitably mention, as if loneliness could be cured by simply filling the empty space with another warm body. A sound pulled him from his brooding, something that didn't belong to the morning desert symphony of wind and distant coyotes. Buck's ears pricked forward and the horse slowed without being asked. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his rifle, though he didn't draw it from the scabbard. There it was again, a soft whimper barely audible above the wind. Human, but small. Young. "Easy, Buck," Caleb whispered, scanning the landscape. His eyes caught movement near a cluster of boulders 50 yards ahead just off the fence line. Something dark against the pale dust. He dismounted slowly, leaving Buck ground-tied with a quiet command to stay. The Winchester came free with a soft whisper of metal on leather. Every step closer revealed more details that made his chest tighten with dread. A child. An Apache boy couldn't be more than 6 or 7 years old, curled into himself like a wounded animal. His clothes were torn inadequate for the freezing morning. Dark hair matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. One small hand clutched at the earth as if trying to anchor himself to the world. Caleb stopped 10 feet away, the rifle hanging loose at his side. The boy's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and rapid. Fever, most likely. Or exposure. Or both. How long had he been out here? Where were his people? The smart thing would be to ride away. Apache children meant Apache adults somewhere nearby. Getting involved could bring nothing but trouble to a man who lived alone miles from help. The army at Fort Whipple would say, "Leave him, that one less Apache child meant one less warrior in a decade's time." His neighbors would call him a fool for even hesitating. But as Caleb stood there watching the child shiver in the dirt, he saw something else. He saw Martha's face that last terrible night, how she'd gripped his hand and made him promise to keep living, to keep caring, even after she was gone. "Don't let your heart turn to stone, Caleb," she'd whispered through her pain. "Promise me you won't become one of those hollow men." He'd failed that promise in almost every way. The ranch ran on routine, not purpose. He ate to survive, not to enjoy. He existed in the space between memory and emptiness. But here now, faced with a dying child, he felt something crack in the wall he'd built around himself. "Damn it all, he muttered, setting the rifle aside and approaching slowly. The boy didn't stir when Caleb knelt beside him, didn't react when rough hands carefully turned him over. The child was burning with fever, his lips cracked and bleeding. Dehydration for certain. His right arm hung at an odd angle, dislocated or broken. Dark bruises colored one side of his face, and his bare feet were cut and swollen. This wasn't just exposure. The boy had been running from something, or someone. Caleb looked around again, studying the horizon for any sign of pursuit or watchers. Nothing moved except the wind through the brush. Whatever had happened to this child, he was alone now. Abandoned or lost, or the sole survivor of something terrible. The practical part of Caleb's mind ran through the implications. Taking in an Apache child would mark him as an Indian lover in the eyes of many. The army might question his loyalty, his few remaining friends might distance themselves further, and if the boy's people came looking and found him here. But the child whimpered again, a sound so lost and frightened that it cut through all rational thought. Caleb shrugged off his coat, the cold immediately biting through his shirt. He wrapped the boy carefully, trying not to jostle the injured arm. The child weighed almost nothing, bird bones and fever heat. "All right, boy," Caleb said, his voice gentle in a way it hadn't been for 2 years. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He carried the child to Buck, who snorted nervously at the unfamiliar scent but stood steady as Caleb had trained him. Getting into the saddle while holding the boy took some maneuvering, but soon they were moving, heading back toward the cabin at a careful walk. The ride seemed endless. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words in Apache that Caleb didn't understand. Once his eyes fluttered open, dark and frightened, fixing on Caleb's face with confusion and fear. "It's all right," Caleb said, though he doubted the child understood English. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt strange on his tongue. Was anywhere really safe in this territory? Was he bringing safety to this child, or danger to them both? The cabin came into view squat and solid against the landscape. Caleb had built it with his own hands, with Martha directing and encouraging her laughter, making the work seem less like labor and more like creating something magical. Now it stood as utilitarian as a grave marker, serving its purpose without grace or warmth. He managed to dismount without dropping the boy, though his back protested the awkward movement. Buck would need tending, but the child came first. The door stuck as it always did in cold weather, requiring a sharp shoulder to force it open. Inside the cabin held the musty smell of a place lived in, but not truly inhabited. A single room with a bed in one corner, a rough table, and 2 chairs, a cook stove that barely held heat, and shelves lined with supplies, and the few books Martha had treasured. Caleb laid the boy on the bed, his own bed, and set about building up the fire in the stove. His hands moved with remembered purpose, filling the kettle with water from the barrel, finding clean cloth that could serve as bandages. Martha had kept a medicine box, insisting they needed to be prepared for anything out here. Caleb had barely touched it since she died, but now he pulled it from the shelf, grateful for her foresight. The boy's fever was dangerous, burning through him like wildfire. Caleb worked methodically, stripping away the torn clothes to reveal more injuries, scratches, bruises, what looked like cactus spines embedded in his legs. Each discovery painted a picture of desperate flight through harsh country. "What happened to you, boy?" Caleb murmured as he worked cleaning wounds with water warmed on the stove. "Where's your family?" The child didn't answer, lost in whatever dark place fever took him. Caleb had seen men die from fever, watched it burn through them until nothing remained but ash and memory. He wouldn't let that happen here, not in this bed where Martha had breathed her last. This place had seen enough death. He worked through the morning and into afternoon, cooling the boy's fever with damp cloths dribbling water between his cracked lips, carefully setting what he was fairly certain was a dislocated shoulder. The child cried out when the joint slipped back into place, a sound that echoed through the cabin and seemed to hang in the air like an accusation. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, though he knew the boy couldn't understand. "I know it hurts, but it had to be done." He made a thin broth from the last of his dried beef, remembering how Martha had nursed him through pneumonia their second winter here. "Small sips," she'd said. "Let the body take what it can handle." The boy managed to swallow a few spoonfuls before turning his head away. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Caleb found himself sitting beside the bed, watching the rise and fall of the small chest. When was the last time he'd cared for another living thing beyond his horse and cattle? When was the last time someone else's survival mattered more than his own routine? The boy looked so small in the bed, so fragile. Apache warriors were the terror of the territory, fierce and proud and deadly. But this child was just that, a child. Someone's son, perhaps someone's brother, definitely someone's loss. "You picked a hell of a place to collapse," Caleb told the unconscious boy. "Could have been found by soldiers who'd have left you to die. Could have been found by Mexicans who'd have sold you across the border. Could have been found by worse men than that." He paused, considering. "Not sure what finding me makes you lucky or cursed." Evening came with a drop in temperature that had Caleb adding more wood to the stove. He dragged his chair closer to the bed, a plate of cold biscuits and dried meat serving as his supper. He couldn't stomach anything more elaborate, not with the boy fighting for his life 3 feet away. The child's breathing had steadied some, the fever perhaps breaking, or at least not climbing higher, small victories in what could still be a losing war. Caleb had no way to know what internal injuries might be hidden, what damage the fever might have already done. He dozed fitfully in the chair, waking every time the boy stirred or cried out. The Apache words meant nothing to him, but the tone was universal fear, pain, loss. Whatever had driven this child into the desert alone had been terrible enough to push him beyond his endurance. Near midnight, the boy's eyes opened with clarity for the first time. They fixed on Caleb with a mixture of terror and confusion, his body tensing as if to flee despite having no strength for it. "Easy," Caleb said, keeping his voice low and calm, the way he'd gentle a spooked horse. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." The boy's gaze darted around the cabin, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. His good hand clutched at the blanket, and Caleb could see him processing his situation, injured, weak, at the mercy of a white man. "Water," Caleb offered, lifting a cup slowly. "Water." Recognition flickered in the child's eyes. He knew that word at least. His cracked lips parted, and Caleb carefully helped him drink, supporting his head with one hand. "That's it," Caleb encouraged. "Slow now." The boy managed several sips before exhaustion pulled him back under, but his breathing was easier now, less labored. The crisis might be passing, though Caleb knew from experience that recovery was often more dangerous than injury. Men who survived the initial trauma could still fade away in the days that followed, their bodies simply giving up the fight. He settled back in his chair, pulling a blanket around his shoulders. The fire in the stove had died to embers, casting everything in a reddish glow that reminded him uncomfortably of other fires, other nights when death had visited this cabin. "You're going to make it," he told the sleeping child, and realized he was making it a command rather than a hope. "You hear me, boy? You're going to survive this. I've had enough death in this place. You're going to live." The night wore on, marked by the whistle of wind through the gaps in the walls and the occasional pop from the stove. Caleb found himself studying the boy's face in the dim light. Strong features, even in youth-high cheekbones and a proud nose. Someone had loved this child, had held him as a baby had taught him to walk and speak and survive in the harsh beauty of Apache life. Where were they now, dead, captured, fled to Mexico, or hiding in the mountains? The Apache wars had scattered families like seeds in a windstorm. The Army's relentless campaigns, the Mexican slave raiders, the settlers pushing ever deeper into traditional lands, it all added up to a people being systematically destroyed. Caleb had never given it much thought before. The Apache were the enemy, everyone said so. They raided ranches, killed settlers, stole livestock. But looking at this child, he wondered what choice they had. Their whole world was being taken from them piece by piece. Maybe violence was the only language left when everything else had been stripped away. "Your people and mine," he said quietly to the sleeping boy. "We're all just trying to survive out here. Problem is, seems like we can't do it without destroying each other." Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the single window. The boy stirred, whimpering in his sleep. Caleb checked his forehead, still warm, but not the dangerous heat of yesterday. Progress. He needed to tend to Buck, who'd spent the night in the small corral without food or a proper brushing. But leaving the boy alone felt wrong, dangerous even. What if the fever spiked again? What if he woke panicked and tried to run? In the end, necessity won. Caleb quickly fed and watered his horse, promising a proper grooming later. He gathered eggs from his 3 remaining chickens, their indignant clucking loud in the morning stillness. Fresh food would help the boy recover if he could keep it down. Back inside, he found the child awake, pressed against the wall like a trapped animal. His dark eyes tracked Caleb's every movement, his good hand clutching something, a small leather pouch that must have been hidden in his clothing. "Hungry?" Caleb asked, holding up the eggs. He made eating motions, feeling foolish, but not knowing how else to communicate. The boy didn't respond, just watched with that intense, unblinking stare. Caleb shrugged and went about cooking, scrambling the eggs with a bit of salt pork for flavor. The smell filled the cabin, and he saw the child's nostrils flare, hunger fighting with fear. He set a plate on the table, then thought better of it. Moving slowly, telegraphing his intentions, he brought the food to the bed, setting it within reach before backing away to his own chair. "Go on," he said. "Eat." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, painfully, the boy reached for the plate. His movements were clumsy, weak, but determined. He managed to get a few bites down before his strength gave out. "That's good," Caleb encouraged. "Rest now. We'll try again later." The day passed in a strange rhythm of care and observation. The boy slept, woke, ate a little, slept again. Caleb went about small chores, always staying within sight, trying to establish himself as a presence that meant safety, not threat. By the second evening, the fever had broken completely. The boy was weak as a newborn colt, but clearly on the mend. He still wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to Caleb's attempts at communication beyond the most basic acceptance of food and water. "You got a name?" Caleb asked during one of the child's wakeful periods. He pointed to himself. "Caleb, Cal-Eb," then pointed at the boy with raised eyebrows. Nothing. Just that steady, evaluating stare. "All right, keep your secrets," Caleb said. "Can't say I blame you, but we're going to need to call you something if you're staying here for a while." The word "staying" hung in the air like a question neither of them could answer. How long could this arrangement last? Someone would come looking for the boy eventually, his people, the army, someone. And then what? On the third morning, Caleb woke to find the boy attempting to stand. He'd managed to get his feet on the floor but swayed dangerously, his injured arm clutched against his chest. "Whoa there," Caleb said, moving quickly to steady him. The boy flinched at his touch but was too weak to pull away. "You're not ready for that yet." He helped the child back to bed, noting how thin he was beneath the borrowed shirt that hung on him like a tent. How long had he been running before Caleb found him days a week? That afternoon brought the first real interaction. Caleb had been reading from one of Martha's books, Ivanhoe, her favorite, more to fill the silence than anything else. His voice had fallen into the rhythm of the words, the familiar story of knights and honor and impossible choices. "You probably don't understand a word of this," he said, looking up to find the boy watching him intently. But Martha always said it was the sound that mattered when someone was sick. The knowing that someone was there. At the mention of Martha's name, something in his voice must have changed because the boy tilted his head slightly, a question in his eyes. "My wife," Caleb explained, though he knew the words meant nothing to the child. He gestured to the empty space beside him, then to his heart, then made a cutting motion. Gone. The boy's expression shifted, something like understanding flickering across his features. He touched his own chest, then pointed toward the window, toward the vast emptiness beyond. His meaning was clear. He had lost people too. Yeah, Caleb said quietly. I figured as much. We're a pair, aren't we? Two lost souls in a hard land. That night the boy spoke for the first time. Just one word barely whispered, but Caleb heard it clear as a bell in the quiet cabin. Tocho. That your name? Caleb asked, sitting forward. Tocho. The smallest nod. Then the boy. Tocho closed his eyes and turned toward the wall, as if even that small revelation had cost him too much. Tocho. Caleb repeated, tasting the foreign sounds. All right then. Good to meet you, Tocho. I'm Caleb, like I said. And for now, at least you're safe here. Safe. That word again making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. But looking at the child curled in his bed, still fragile but fighting to survive, Caleb felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years' purpose. Not just the routine of survival, but an actual reason to see tomorrow. The fourth day dawned clear and cold ice crystals forming on the inside of the window. Caleb had given up his bed entirely, making a pallet on the floor near the stove. His back protested every morning, but the boy needed the bed more than he did. Tocho was definitely improving. He ate with more appetite, stayed awake for longer periods, and had even managed to walk to the chamber pot with minimal assistance. But he remained largely silent, speaking only when absolutely necessary, and even then, in Apache words Caleb didn't understand. It was mid-morning when everything changed. Caleb was outside splitting wood for the stove when Buck suddenly threw his head up, ears pointed toward the ridge that overlooked the cabin. The horse's whole body tensed, and he let out a sharp whinny of alarm. 3 figures stood silhouetted against the sky, unmoving as statues. Even from this distance, Caleb could see they were Apache 2 women and what looked like an older woman or perhaps a young man he couldn't tell. They made no aggressive moves, carried no visible weapons, but their presence alone was enough to send ice through his veins. Moving slowly, he set down the axe and walked to where his rifle leaned against the cabin wall. He didn't point it at them, just held it ready. The figures began to descend, picking their way down the rocky slope with careful precision. As they got closer, details emerged. 3 women, all of them showing signs of hard travel. Their clothes were dust-covered and worn, their faces gaunt with exhaustion, and something else, desperation. The eldest, perhaps 40 years old, walked in front, her back straight, despite whatever weight she carried. They stopped 20 feet from the cabin, close enough to talk, far enough to run if needed. The eldest woman looked at Caleb with eyes that had seen too much, measured him, in a glance that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. "You have our son," she said, in accented but clear English. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. Our son. Of course. He should have expected this, should have known someone would come. But the reality of it, these women standing here claiming Tocho, made something in his chest tighten. "He's inside," Caleb said, his voice rougher than intended. "He's hurt, but healing." "We know hurt," the woman said. "Army hurt him. Soldiers came to our camp, killed the men, took the young women. We ran. Tocho got separated in the dark. We searched." Her voice broke slightly, the first crack in her composure. "We searched for 3 days." The younger women behind her stood silent, but Caleb could see the exhaustion in their faces, the grief they carried like physical weight. One couldn't be more than 20, the other perhaps 16. Sisters, by the resemblance. All 3 women bore the same proud features he'd seen in Tocho's face. "He's safe," Caleb heard himself say. "Fever broke yesterday. He's eating, getting stronger. We take him now," the eldest woman said. But there was a question in it, an uncertainty. They were in no condition to carry an injured child through the wilderness. Caleb looked at them, really looked. Their moccasins were worn through, feet bleeding. They had no supplies visible, no food, no water. They'd probably been surviving on whatever they could find, driven by desperate hope of finding the boy. "He can't travel," Caleb said. "Not yet. Neither can you from the looks of it." The woman's chin lifted, pride flaring in her eyes. "We Apache. We strong." "Strong enough to die trying to prove a point," Caleb said bluntly. "But that won't help the boy." They stood frozen in that moment, neither side willing to give ground. The wind picked up, cutting through the thin fabric of the women's dresses. The youngest shivered, trying to hide it, but failing. Inside the cabin, Caleb heard movement. Tocho must have heard voices. A moment later, the door creaked open, and the boy appeared holding onto the doorframe for support. His face transformed when he saw the women, joy and relief breaking through his careful guard. "Shima!" he cried, the word needing no translation. "Mother." The eldest woman made a sound like a wounded animal, rushing forward despite everything. Caleb stepped aside, watching as she gathered Tocho into her arms. Both of them crying now, words pouring out in Apache that sounded like prayers and scoldings and endearments all mixed together. The younger women followed, surrounding the boy, touching his face, his arms assuring themselves he was real. The youngest, barely more than a child herself, kept repeating something that sounded like, "His name," tears streaming down her face. Caleb stood apart, rifle hanging loose in his hand, watching this reunion with a mixture of emotions he couldn't name. The cabin that had felt too empty for 2 years was suddenly full of life, of love, of family. Just not his family. The eldest woman looked up at him over Tocho's head. "You saved him." "He saved himself," Caleb said. "I just gave him a place to do it." She studied him for a long moment, then spoke rapidly in Apache to the others. The younger women looked uncertain, frightened even, but she seemed to be overruling their objections. "We stay," she announced, turning back to Caleb. "Until Toko's strong. Until we all strong." Caleb's first instinct was to refuse. Having an Apache woman and children in his cabin would destroy what little reputation he had left. The army would ask questions. His neighbors would assume the worst. But looking at them, exhausted, desperate, holding on to each other like they might disappear, he couldn't form the words of rejection. "There's not much room," he said instead, "and not much food." "We work," the woman said firmly. "We not take charity. We work help, then go when safe." "What's your name?" Caleb asked. "Leia," she said. She gestured to the younger women. "My sisters, Rena, Tula." Then, touching Tocho's head gently, "My son, you gave him back to me. This debt we carry." "No debt," Caleb said uncomfortably. "Just did what anyone would do." Leia's expression suggested she knew exactly how false that statement was. Most men would have left an Apache child to die. Many would have hastened that death. "Come inside," Caleb said, surprising himself. "It's cold and you all look like you could use some food." The cabin that had seemed adequate for one man suddenly felt impossibly small with 5 people in it. The women stood clustered near the door, uncertain, while Toko tried to explain something in rapid Apache, pointing at various things: the bed where he'd recovered the stove that had warmed him, the chair where Caleb had kept watch. Caleb busied himself building up the fire and pulling out what food he had. It wasn't much: some dried beef, a pot of beans that had been simmering since yesterday, the last of his flour that could make simple pan bread. But it was food, and these women looked like they hadn't had a real meal in days. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. "Please." Leia translated for her sisters, and they moved cautiously to the rough wooden chairs. Caleb noticed how they positioned themselves, able to see both the door and window, ready to flee if necessary. He understood that instinct, the need to always have an escape route. He served the food in silence, aware of how strange this must be for all of them. Apache women sitting at a white man's table eating his food, trusting him enough to let their guard down even slightly. The youngest, Tula, could barely keep her eyes open as she ate exhaustion, finally overcoming fear. "How long were you running?" Caleb asked Leia. 1 week, she said between bites. "Soldiers attacked at dawn. No warning. They said we were hostile, but we were just camping. Families, children." Her voice hardened. "They didn't care." "Your men?" "Dead, captured, scattered." She said it matter-of-factly, but Caleb saw the pain beneath the words. "My husband fell in the first attack. Tocho's father. He told me, 'Run, take the boy.' So I ran." The simple statement carried the weight of a world destroyed. Caleb thought of his own loss, how Martha's death had seemed to end everything. But at least he still had his land, his home, his freedom. These women had lost all of that and more. "You can't stay here long," he said, hating himself for the practical words, but knowing they needed to be said. The army patrols this area. If they find you here, we know, Leia said. Few days. Get strong. Then go to mountains, find others who survived. Others. Were there others? Or was she clinging to hope that had no foundation? Caleb had heard the reports from Fort Whipple, the casualty numbers from the recent campaigns. The Apache were being systematically destroyed or rounded up for the reservations. These women and Toko might be among the last free Apache in the territory. Night fell while they ate darkness pressing against the single window. Caleb lit a lantern, the yellow light making the cabin feel even smaller. The sleeping arrangements would be a problem. 1 bed, 5 people. You take the bed, he told Leia, gesturing to include her sisters and Toko. I'll sleep outside. No, Leia said firmly. You're home. We sleep floor. Don't be foolish. You're exhausted, and the boy needs... We have slept on worse than floors, Leia interrupted. We not take your bed. They compromised as much as 2 stubborn people could. Caleb gave them his blankets, keeping only his coat. The women made a nest near the stove with Tocho in the middle, protected and warm. Caleb took his usual chair rifle across his lap, telling himself he was keeping watch, but really just not knowing where else to be. The cabin settled into quiet, broken only by the pop of wood in the stove and the soft breathing of exhausted people finally able to rest. Caleb found himself studying the shadows they made this unexpected family that had invaded his solitary existence. The first light of dawn crept through the cabin window, finding Caleb still in his chair, neck stiff from dozing upright. The women and Tocho remained asleep near the stove, tangled together in a way that spoke of long practice at finding warmth and comfort in harsh conditions. He watched them for a moment, these strangers who had transformed his ordered solitude into something else entirely. Moving quietly, he stepped outside to tend to Buck and the chickens. The morning air bit sharp and clean, and he could see his breath forming clouds that drifted toward the mountains. Everything looked the same as yesterday, yet everything had changed. The presence of those women and the boy inside his cabin had shifted something fundamental in his world. You've gone and done it now, he muttered to Buck as he measured out feed. Took in Apache women and a child. Martha would either be proud or call me 7 kinds of fool. The horse nudged his shoulder, more interested in breakfast than his owner's philosophical musings. Caleb ran his hand along Buck's neck, finding comfort in the familiar routine. At least some things remained constant. When he returned to the cabin with fresh eggs, he found Leia awake, standing by the window and watching the sunrise. She turned at his entrance, and he saw she'd been crying, though her face was now composed. Couldn't sleep, he asked quietly, not wanting to wake the others. Sleep is for those without ghosts, she replied, her English more fluid than he'd expected. You understand this? He did. God help him. He understood exactly what she meant. The ghosts that visited in the dark hours, the memories that refused to fade, the weight of survival when others hadn't survived. Coffee, he offered, holding up the pot. Yes, she said, and something in that simple acceptance felt like a bridge being built. They sat at the table while the others slept, 2 broken people sharing bitter coffee in silence. The sun climbed higher, painting the rough walls gold, and Caleb found himself really looking at Leia for the first time. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 35, with strong features that would have been beautiful if not marked by exhaustion and grief. Her hands wrapped around the tin cup showed scars from a lifetime of work. Your English is good, he said, needing to break the silence that had grown too comfortable. Mission school, she replied with a bitter smile. When I was young, before I knew better, they tried to make me white. Cut my hair, forbid our language, teach me to be ashamed. She took a sip of coffee. I learned their words but kept my spirit. The words are useful now. And your husband, dead 8 days now, she said simply. He was a good man, strong. He fought to give us time to run. Her fingers tightened on the cup. The soldiers shot him many times. They wanted to make sure. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only appropriate response to loss. Your wife, Leia said, not quite a question. 2 years ago, Caleb answered. Childbirth. The baby, too. I'm sorry, she said, and he could tell she meant it. Death was a universal language that needed no translation. Rena stirred near the stove, sitting up with the instant alertness of someone used to danger. She saw Caleb and immediately tensed, but Leia spoke to her in Apache, something reassuring. The younger woman nodded but kept watching him with suspicious eyes. She doesn't trust easily, Leia explained. Soldiers did things before we escaped. The implication hung heavy in the air. Caleb felt anger rise in his throat, surprising in its intensity. He'd heard stories, of course, about what some soldiers did when they found Apache women alone. He dismissed them as exaggerations, the kind of tales that grew in the telling. Looking at Rena's haunted eyes, he realized the stories were probably understated. "She's safe here," he said firmly. "From you, yes," Leia agreed. But if soldiers come, it was a fair question and one he didn't have an answer for. If the army showed up and found Apache women in his cabin, there would be no good outcome for anyone. Tula woke next, the youngest sister unfolding from sleep like a flower opening. In daylight, Caleb could see she was indeed barely more than a child, perhaps 16. She had the same strong features as her sisters, but without the hardness that came from too much loss too soon. Tocho was last to wake, and when he did, he immediately sought his mother. The boy's recovery was remarkable. Children had a resilience that amazed Caleb. Already he was moving better, the fever fully broken, his eyes clear. Breakfast was a quiet affair, everyone navigating the strangeness of the situation. Caleb scrambled eggs, while Leia made something with the flour and water, cooking it on the stovetop into a kind of flat bread he'd never seen before. It was good, better than his usual attempts at bread. "You need supplies," Leia observed, looking at his nearly empty shelves. "Was planning to go to town this week," Caleb admitted. "But now you have Apache in your home," she finished. "Yes. Problem." They both understood the impossibility of it. He couldn't leave them alone. If anyone discovered them, they'd be captured or killed, but he couldn't take them to town, and his supplies wouldn't last 5 people more than a few more days. "There's another way," Caleb said slowly, an idea forming. "There's a Mexican trader, Hernandez, who comes through the valley every few weeks. He doesn't ask questions if the price is right. Should be through in the next day or two if he keeps his usual schedule." Leia translated for her sisters, and a rapid discussion in Apache followed. Caleb caught Tocho's name several times, and the boy himself looked anxious about something. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked. "Tocho says there are others," Leia explained. "From our band. He saw them running too during the attack. They might be hiding in the canyon lands, waiting." "How many, He doesn't know. Few. Maybe none survived. But if they did..." She didn't need to finish. If there were other survivors, they'd be in the same desperate situation, hunted, starving, afraid. The humane thing would be to help them. The practical thing would be to pretend he'd never heard about them. "We could look," he heard himself say, immediately regretting it. "I know the canyon lands pretty well. If they're hiding there, I might be able to find them." Leia's eyes widened slightly. "You would do this..." "I'm already harboring fugitives," Caleb said with a bitter laugh. "Might as well make it a proper crime." The rest of the morning was spent in preparation. If Caleb was going to search the canyons, he'd need to go alone. Taking any of them would slow him down and increase the danger. But leaving the women and Tocho at the cabin carried its own risks. "Can you shoot?" he asked Leia, holding up his spare rifle. "Yes," she said simply. "My husband taught me." He showed her where he kept the ammunition, walked her through the peculiarities of the weapon. Her hands were steady on the rifle, her stance speaking of familiarity with firearms. "Anyone comes while I'm gone, you hide," he instructed. "There's a root cellar under the floor covered by that rug. All of you can fit if needed. Only come out if you hear my voice, and only if I say, 'Martha sends her regards.' That's how you'll know it's safe." "Martha sends her regards," Leia repeated carefully. "Your wife's name is a password." "She would have liked that," Caleb said, surprised to find it was true. Martha would have appreciated the irony of her name protecting Apache women. He packed light for speed water, some dried meat, extra ammunition. The canyon lands were a maze of rock and shadow, easy to get lost in if you didn't know the landmarks. He'd hunted there often in the early days before Martha got sick, before everything changed. I'll be back before dark, he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure he could keep that promise. Toko grabbed his sleeve as he headed for the door, speaking urgently in Apache. Leia translated, "He says to look for the white rock that looks like an eagle. That's where they were supposed to meet if they got separated." Eagle Rock. Caleb nodded. He knew the place a distinctive formation about 5 miles into the canyons. "I'll check there first." The ride to the canyonlands took 2 hours, Buck picking his way carefully through increasingly rough terrain. Caleb kept scanning the horizon for any sign of other riders, soldiers, or otherwise, but saw only the occasional hawk circling in the thermals. The canyons opened before him like a wound in the earth, all red rock and shadow. Years of flash floods had carved twisted passages that led nowhere dead ends that could trap the unwary, but they also offered perfect hiding places for those who knew how to use them. Eagle Rock stood pale against the darker stone, its shape indeed resembling a bird with spread wings. Caleb approached carefully, aware that desperate people might shoot first and ask questions later. If there were survivors here, they'd be on edge, ready to fight or flee. "Hello, the camp!" he called out in what little Apache he'd picked up from Leia that morning. It probably sounded terrible, but it might be enough to show he wasn't a soldier. Nothing, just the wind singing through the rocks. He dismounted, leading Buck into the shadow of the formation. There were signs someone had been here, disturbed earth, what might be blood on a rock-torn fabric caught on a thorny bush. But whoever had been here was gone now. Following the signs deeper into the canyon, he found them an hour later. Or rather, they found him. The arrow came out of nowhere, burying itself in the ground, inches from Buck's front hooves. The horse reared, and Caleb fought to control him while trying to spot the archer. "Friend!" he shouted in English, then attempted the Apache word Leia had taught him. "Friend Tocho sent me." A figure emerged from behind a boulder bow still drawn. An old Apache man, perhaps 60 face, weathered to leather, and eyes hard as flint. Behind him, Caleb could see others, a woman with 2 small children, another elderly woman, what looked like a teenage boy trying to stand despite an obvious leg injury. "Tocho," the old man said, lowering the bow slightly. "Yes, Tocho," Caleb confirmed, moving slowly to show he meant no harm. "He's safe, with Leia, at my cabin." The old man said something in Apache to the others, and the woman with children began crying. The teenage boy called out something that sounded like a question. "You speak English?" Caleb asked the old man. "Little," the man replied, the word heavily accented. "Tocho lives?" "Yes. Sick before, but better now. Leia and her sisters, too. They sent me to find you." The old man translated, and the small group erupted in a mixture of tears and rapid conversation. The woman with children rushed forward, grabbing Caleb's hands and speaking rapidly in Apache, clearly desperate for news. "She asks about her sister," the old man explained. "Rena." "Rena's safe," Caleb assured her. "She's with Leia at my place." More tears, but relief now, instead of grief. Caleb looked at the pitiful group, 7 people total, including the children who couldn't be more than 4 and 6. They were in bad shape, worse than Leia and her sisters had been. The teenager's leg was definitely broken, and one of the children had the glassy eyes of fever. "You need help," Caleb said to the old man. "Food, medicine, shelter." "We need to not die," the old man replied with bitter humor. "But death follows Apache now, everywhere we go." "Not to my place," Caleb said, making a decision that would have seemed insane a week ago. "You can come back with me. Rest, heal, figure out what to do next." The old man studied him for a long moment. "Why? Why does white man help Apache?" It was a fair question, one Caleb wasn't sure he could answer. Because of Tocho. Because of the promise he'd made to Martha about not becoming hollow. Because seeing these desperate people reminded him that there were worse things than his own grief. "Because it's right," he said finally. "That has to be enough." The journey back to the cabin was slow torture. The teenager who Caleb learned was named Kuruk couldn't ride and could barely walk even with support. They ended up fashioning a travois from branches and blankets, Buck pulling it carefully over the rough ground. The children rode with Caleb, their small bodies burning with fever against his chest. The old man who gave his name as Nantan walked alongside, despite clearly being exhausted. He'd been a warrior once, he told Caleb, in his broken English, had fought the Mexicans and the Americans both. Now he was just trying to keep what remained of his family alive. This war, he said, gesturing at the empty landscape. It's ending. Apache losing. Soon no more free Apache, only reservation Apache or dead Apache. Maybe it doesn't have to end that way, Caleb suggested. Nantan laughed, bitter and knowing. It always ends same way for Apache. We fight, we run, we die. Just matter of when. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and red. Leia must have been watching because she emerged before they even reached the door, crying out when she saw who Caleb had brought. The reunion was chaotic tears embraces rapid Apache that Caleb couldn't follow. Rena fell to her knees beside the woman with children who Caleb now understood was indeed her sister. The children, despite their fever, reached for Leia and Tula, clearly knowing them. My cousin, Leia explained to Caleb, indicating the woman. Ayana, we thought she was dead. The teenager Kuruk turned out to be some kind of nephew to Nantan, and everyone seemed to know the elderly woman who was introduced as Doba, an aunt to someone, though Caleb lost track of the exact relationship. His cabin, which had seemed crowded with 5 people, now held 12. They squeezed in as best they could the wounded and sick, given priority near the stove. Caleb gave up any pretense of maintaining ownership of the space, focusing instead on practical matters. We need food, he told Leia. Medicine. Supplies for that boy's leg. Hernandez, she asked. Has to be. Tomorrow, if we're lucky. They spent the evening in triage mode. Kuruk's leg was indeed broken, and setting it properly was beyond Caleb's skill. They did their best with splints made from kindling and torn blankets. The children's fever worried him more. He'd seen too many children die from fever that started just like this. Doba, despite being elderly, proved to have extensive knowledge of healing. She examined the children with gentle hands, speaking to Leia in Apache, her tone urgent. She needs willow bark, Leia translated, for the fever, and other plants she can find them if you show her where water grows. There's a stream about a mile east, Caleb said. Willows grow there. I'll go with her in the morning, Leia decided, before the sun gets high. The sleeping arrangements were impossible. They ended up with the wounded on the bed, the children and women near the stove, and the men, Caleb and Nantan, taking turns on watch by the door. It should have been uncomfortable, should have been awkward, but instead it felt almost natural, like this was how people were meant to live together, supporting each other through crisis. Late in the night, Caleb found himself outside with Nantan, both of them unable to sleep. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. You risk much, Nantan said eventually. Your people will not understand. My people haven't understood me since my wife died, Caleb replied. Maybe before that. She was a good woman. The best, Caleb said simply. She would have liked you, would have done exactly what I'm doing, only better. Then you honor her, Nantan said with approval. The dead appreciate when we act as they would have acted. It was a perspective on grief Caleb hadn't considered before. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost that he hadn't thought about what Martha would want him to do with what remained. The next morning brought new challenges. Hernandez was indeed coming. Caleb spotted his wagon dust from the ridge, but that meant hiding 11 Apache in and around his cabin while he traded. The root cellar could hold maybe 6 people uncomfortably. The others would have to hide in the barn or the chicken coop. This is insane, Caleb muttered as they organized the concealment. Yes, Leia agreed cheerfully, but good insane. Hernandez arrived at midday, his wagon creaking under the weight of goods. He was a round man with a magnificent mustache and a shrewd eye that missed nothing. Including Caleb, suspected the signs of extra people around the cabin. Senor Warren, Hernandez greeted him. You look different. How so? Less dead, the trader said bluntly. Like maybe you found reason to live again. I need supplies, Caleb said, changing the subject. More than usual. Oh, Hernandez's eyebrows rose. You having a party? Something like that? Can you get what I need without asking questions? Questions are expensive, Hernandez agreed. Not asking them is cheaper. They negotiated Caleb trading what little he had of value, Martha's jewelry, that he'd kept in a box, unable to look at it for 2 years. It hurt to let it go, but he thought she'd approve of the cause. Hernandez loaded off flour beans, salt pork, coffee sugar, and importantly medical supplies, including laudanum for pain and real bandages for Karuk's leg. He also, without being asked, included several blankets and what looked like children's clothes. Sometimes, Hernandez said carefully as he prepared to leave, I find things. Things that maybe fell off army wagons or were left behind when people moved quickly. Sometimes these things need new homes where nobody asks where they came from. I understand, Caleb said. Good. Because sometimes I find interesting things, like army patrol schedules, like news that troops are moving south for 2 weeks chasing ghosts in Mexico. He climbed onto his wagon. Just things I hear. Thank you, Caleb said, meaning it. Don't thank me. I'm just trader who doesn't see anything, doesn't know anything. He clicked to his horses. But senor, whatever you're doing, be careful. The army, they don't forgive. And they don't forget. After he left, the Apache emerged from their hiding places, everyone talking at once about the close call. The children, despite their sickness, seemed to think it had been a grand adventure. With the new supplies, Dobo was able to make proper medicine for the fevered children. Within a day, their temperatures dropped and their eyes cleared. Karuk's leg was properly set with real splints, and though he'd limp for a while, he'd heal. The cabin had transformed into something Caleb didn't quite recognize. Where once there had been silence and emptiness, now there was constant motion and sound. The women had taken over the cooking, producing meals from the simple ingredients that put his bachelor efforts to shame. The children, recovering quickly as children do, played quietly in whatever corner they could find. Even Toko had begun to smile, to act like the child he was, rather than a survivor. It was on the 4th night of this strange cohabitation that things shifted between Caleb and Leia. They were sitting outside again, both unable to sleep, watching the moon rise over the desert. We cannot stay, Leia said quietly. You know this. I know, Caleb admitted. But where will you go, Mexico, maybe. Or deeper into mountains where soldiers don't go. That's no life for children. Neither is reservation. Neither is being hunted. She pulled her knees to her chest, looking younger in the moonlight. There are no good choices for Apache now. You could stay, Caleb heard himself say. Not all of you I know, but you and Toko, maybe your sisters. Leia turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. Why would you offer this? Why indeed? Because in the past week, his cabin had felt more like home than it had in 2 years. Because watching her with Tocho reminded him of what family meant. Because her quiet strength and unexpected humor had begun to fill spaces he thought would stay empty forever. Because it makes sense, he said, instead of any of that. A man alone out here draws attention. A man with a family doesn't. A white man with Apache family draws different attention. Maybe, but if we're careful, if we have a story. What story? Leia asked, and he could hear something in her voice, not quite hope, but not rejection either. Mexican woman and her son fleeing trouble in Sonora. Cousins, maybe? Ranch woman who knows cattle and horses. He was making it up as he went, but it didn't sound impossible. Your English is good enough. People don't look too close if the story makes sense. And my sisters. Same story, family staying together after tragedy. Leia was quiet for so long he thought she'd rejected the idea entirely. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. My husband was good man, strong warrior, but he's dead, and I must think of living now, of Toko living. She paused. You're good man too. Different kind of strong. I'm not, Caleb started to protest. You are, Leia interrupted. You took an enemy child, fed him, healed him, risked everything to help people not your people. This is strength. They sat in silence that felt full of possibility. Inside the cabin, someone coughed, someone else murmured in sleep, the sounds of life, of family, of something more than mere survival. The others need to leave soon, Leia said. Nantan knows place in Mexico where Apaches still live free. Small place hidden, but safe. They go there. And you... I think about your offer. Talk to sisters. Decide what's best for Toko. It was reasonable practical, but Caleb found himself hoping desperately that she'd choose to stay. The thought of the cabin returning to its former emptiness was almost physically painful. The next few days took on a surreal quality. They knew the separation was coming non-tan and the others couldn't stay and decisions had to be made. But in the meantime, they lived as if they were actually the family they pretended to be. Caleb taught Kuruk and Tocho how to mend fence, the boys working together despite the language barrier. Kuruk was on crutches Caleb had fashioned from oak branches, but he was determined to be useful. His broken leg would heal, Doba assured them, though he'd probably always have a slight limp. The women worked on making the cabin more livable. Somehow, with no resources but ingenuity, they created separate spaces for privacy, improved the cooking area, even managed to patch some of the gaps that let in cold air. The cabin began to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. It was Ayana who surprised Caleb most. Rena's sister had seemed fragile at first, traumatized by whatever had happened during the army attack. But as her children recovered, so did she. She had a gift with animals gentling Buck in a way Caleb had never managed, and the chickens actually began laying more eggs. She speaks to their spirits, Leia explained when Caleb expressed amazement. Animals know she means no harm. One evening, they all gathered for what everyone knew would be one of their last meals together. The women had prepared a feast by their standards: rabbit stew, flatbread, even a kind of pudding made from cornmeal, and the last of the sugar. They ate in companionable noise, the children giggling at something Nantan was doing with his hands making shadow animals on the wall. "This," Doba said in her limited English, gesturing at all of them, "this is good. This is how people should be. Together." Leia translated though Caleb had understood. She says people are meant to be together, not alone. After dinner, Nantan pulled Caleb aside. "We leave tomorrow night," he said quietly. "Moon will be dark, good for traveling. You have everything you need. You gave us much: food, medicine, hope." The old warrior clasped Caleb's shoulder. "You are friend to Apache. This is remembered." "Just stay safe," Caleb said. "That's all I ask." "Safe," Nantan repeated with his bitter smile. "Apache forgot what this word means, but we survive, always survive." The next day was bittersweet. Everyone knew it was ending this strange moment of grace they'd found. The children seemed to sense it clinging more than usual to Leia and Tula. Tocho was especially quiet, watching his mother with anxious eyes. That afternoon, Leia found Caleb repairing harness in the barn. She stood in the doorway, backlit by sun, and he thought he'd never seen anyone look so beautiful and so sad at the same time. "We stay," she said simply. Caleb's hand stilled on the leather. "You're sure?" "Tula wants to go with others. She's young, still believes in finding perfect safety. But Rena and I, we stay with you, if offer is real." "It's real," Caleb said, standing to face her. "More real than anything I've felt in 2 years." "Then we learn to be Mexican cousins," Leia said with a small smile. "Learn to be family that isn't family." "Maybe," Caleb said carefully. "Eventually it could be more than pretend." Leia's eyes searched his face. "Your wife would want me to live," Caleb finished, "would want this place filled with life again, with children laughing, with hope." "My husband would want same for me," Leia admitted. "But grief is not gone just because we say it is." "No," Caleb agreed, "but maybe grief shared is easier than grief alone." She moved close enough that he could smell the sage she'd been burning for Doba's medicines. "You're a strange man, Caleb Warren, taking in enemies, making them family. You're a strange woman, Leia, trusting enemy with your son, with your life." "Maybe strange is what we need now," she said. "World is changing, old ways dying. Maybe strange is how we survive." That night they said goodbye to those who were leaving. It was harder than Caleb had expected. In just a week, these people had become important to him. Ayana wept as she embraced her sister Rena, the two of them speaking rapidly in Apache, making promises to find each other again someday. Tula was the hardest. The youngest sister had decided at the last moment to go with the others, unable to imagine a life pretending to be something she wasn't. She held Leia for a long time, both of them crying. "She's young. Leia explained to Caleb through her tears. She needs to be with full Apache, needs to find Apache husband, have Apache children. I understand, but it hurts. Nantan shook Caleb's hand formally, then surprised him by embracing him. You save us, the old man said. This debt too big to repay. No debt, Caleb said, echoing what he'd told Leia that first day. Just people helping people. This is best debt of all, Nantan replied. Kind, that makes more kindness. They left in full dark shadows, disappearing into shadows. Caleb watched from the doorway until he couldn't see them anymore, until they were just memory and hope heading for Mexico and whatever freedom they could find. The cabin felt enormous with just 5 of them, Caleb, Leia, Rena, Tocho, and the weight of all their ghosts. They stood awkwardly in the sudden space, not quite sure how to be this new configuration. I make tea, Rena said in her hesitant English, breaking the spell. As she busied herself at the stove, Leia touched Caleb's arm. Thank you, she said, for giving us choice, for letting others go safely. Everyone deserves choices, Caleb said, even if they're all hard ones. Toko had curled up on the bed, exhausted by emotion. He looked so small, so vulnerable. This boy who'd survived so much would now have to survive something else, becoming something he wasn't, in order to stay alive. Will he be all right, Caleb asked. Living as Mexican instead of Apache. Children adapt, Leia said, though her tone suggested she worried too. He'll learn. We all will. They drank Rena's tea in silence, each lost in thought about what came next. Tomorrow, they'd have to start creating their cover story, establishing the fiction that would keep them safe. Mexican cousins from Sonora fleeing some vague trouble. It could work if they were careful, if they were lucky. We need Mexican names, Leia said suddenly. Can't be Leia and Rena and Tosho if we're Mexican. It was such a practical concern, yet it carried enormous weight. To change their names was to change who they were, to bury their Apache identity under necessary lies. Choose names that mean something, Caleb suggested. Names you can live with. They spent the rest of the evening creating new identities. Leia became Elena close enough to her real name to remember. Rena chose Rosa because she'd once known a kind Mexican woman by that name. Tocho would be called Tomas, which he accepted with the resignation of a child who'd already lost too much to fight about a name. And we need a story about my husband, Leia Elena said. Why I'm alone with child and sister. Bandits, Caleb suggested. Killed in a raid. Common enough to be believed, vague enough that details don't matter. Yes, she agreed, and he could see her mentally rehearsing the lie. Bandits killed my husband. We fled north, found work with cousin Caleb. We'll need to practice, Rena Rosa said. Make story same every time. They were still working out details when exhaustion finally overtook them. The sleeping arrangements with fewer people were easier, but somehow more awkward. The presence of all the others had provided a kind of buffer. Now it was just them, this constructed family that wasn't quite real yet. Caleb took his usual chair, but Leia stopped him. No. You take bed. Your house. Your bed. I'm fine. Please, she said, and something in her voice made him stop arguing. We need to start as we mean to go on. You're the rancher. We're the help the cousins from Mexico. It needs to look right. She was practical, thinking ahead to when others might visit, might see their arrangements. But Caleb hated the distance it put between them, the formal roles they'd have to play. That night, lying in his own bed for the first time in over a week, Caleb stared at the ceiling and wondered what he'd done. Taking in refugees temporarily was one thing. Creating this elaborate deception, planning to live it perhaps forever, was another entirely. But then he heard Tocho Tomas murmur in his sleep, heard Leia's soft voice soothing him in Spanish. She was still learning, and he knew he'd made the right choice. The cabin was alive again. He was alive again in ways that had nothing to do with mere breathing and everything to do with purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. They'd have to be careful, consistent, convincing. They'd have to teach Toko to respond to his Mexican name, to speak Spanish instead of Apache in public, to forget half of who he was in order to survive. But tonight they were together. This strange, constructed, fragile family built from loss and necessity. and the first stirrings of something that might become love. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The first test of their new identities came sooner than expected. 3 days after the others had left for Mexico, Caleb spotted riders approaching from the east. His stomach clenched as he recognized the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers, 5 of them riding in formation toward his cabin. "Soldiers," he said quietly to Leia, who was teaching Tocho to write his new name at the table. "Remember you're Elena, from Sonora." She nodded, her face composed, though he saw her hands tremble slightly. "Rosa," she called to her sister in Spanish. "Soldiers coming. Remember who we are." Rena emerged from where she'd been tending the chickens, her expression carefully neutral. They'd practiced this, but practice and reality were different things. These were the same uniforms worn by the men who'd killed their family, destroyed their world. "Tomás," Leia said to her son, "go help your tia Rosa with the chickens. Stay there until I call you." The boy looked confused but obeyed, following Rena back outside. Caleb was grateful for his compliance. Children could give away secrets without meaning to, especially when frightened. The soldiers reached the cabin, their sergeant, a weathered man with salt and pepper beard, dismounting first. Caleb recognized him, Sergeant McKenna from Fort Whipple. They'd met a few times in town, though never more than passing acknowledgement. Warren McKenna greeted him, eyes already scanning the property. "Heard you might have seen some Apache in these parts." "Apache." Caleb kept his voice level. "Haven't seen any. When was this?" "About a week back. War party hit a patrol near Skull Rock, killed 2 soldiers. We tracked them this direction before losing the trail." McKenna's gaze fell on Leia, who stood in the doorway. "Who's this?" "My cousin Caleb," said the lie, rolling off his tongue more easily than expected. "Elena, from Sonora. She's helping with the ranch work." McKenna touched his hat brim politely. "Ma'am." Then in Spanish, "You're from Sonora?" Leia's Spanish was accented but passable. "Sí, señor, yeah, from near Hermosillo. My husband was killed by bandits. My cousin was kind enough to take us in." "Us?" McKenna asked, switching back to English. "Her sister and son are here too," Caleb explained. "They needed somewhere safe. You know how it is down there, revolution one day, bandits the next." McKenna nodded slowly, but his eyes remained suspicious. "Mind if we water our horses?" "Been riding since dawn." "Of course," Caleb said. Though inside he was calculating rapidly. The soldiers would be around for at least half an hour. That was 30 minutes for someone to make a mistake, for Tocho to speak Apache instead of Spanish, for any of dozen things to go wrong. As the soldiers saw to their horses, McKenna wandered closer to the cabin, his casual manner not fooling Caleb for a second. The sergeant was looking for something, some sign that didn't fit. "Funny thing," McKenna said conversationally. "We found tracks near here, small ones like women and children, Apache moccasin prints." "Lots of Apache have passed through this territory over the years," Caleb replied. "Could be old tracks." "Could be," McKenna agreed. "Except these were fresh, maybe a week old." Rena chose that moment to come around the corner with Tocho both carrying eggs. The boy froze when he saw the soldiers, his eyes going wide with fear. For a terrible moment, Caleb thought he would run or cry out in Apache. But Leia moved smoothly, calling out in Spanish, "Tomás, bring the eggs here. Say hello to the soldiers properly." The boy looked at his mother, then at the soldiers, and managed a small, "Buenos dias, señores." "Good-looking boy," McKenna observed. "Looks Indian, though. Not full Mexican." "His father had Yaqui blood," Leia said smoothly. "Many in Sonora do." It was a clever lie. The Yaqui were indeed prevalent in Sonora, and their features could be similar to Apache. McKenna seemed to accept it, though his gaze lingered on Tocho longer than comfortable. One of the younger soldiers, a private who couldn't be more than 19, approached Rena with obvious interest. "Afternoon, Miss Wam," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Private Collins." Rena looked at him with barely concealed disgust, but managed to nod politely. Caleb could see her struggle, could imagine what she was thinking. Men in uniforms, just like his, had done terrible things to her. Yet she held her composure, playing her role. "My cousin Rosa is recently widowed," Leia said in English, putting protective emphasis on the words. She's still in mourning. Collins backed off, looking embarrassed. My apologies, ma'am. Meant no disrespect. The soldiers lingered for another 20 minutes, McKenna asking seemingly casual questions about movements in the area, any strangers passing through, any unusual sounds at night. Caleb answered truthfully where he could, lied smoothly where he had to. You know, McKenna said as he prepared to mount up, it's dangerous out here for a man alone with women and children. These Apache, they're desperate now, capable of anything. We're careful, Caleb assured him, and we're well armed. Still, McKenna persisted. Might be safer if your cousins went into town. Plenty of work for Mexican women there. Safer, too. They're family, Caleb said firmly. They stay here. McKenna shrugged, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied. Your choice, Warren. Just remember harboring hostiles is a hanging offense, even if they're women and children. I'll remember, Caleb said, meeting his gaze steadily. After the soldiers left, they all stood frozen for a long moment, as if movement might somehow call them back. Then Tocho began crying great gasping sobs that shook his small frame. Leia gathered him close, murmuring comfort in Apache before catching herself and switching to Spanish. We can't do that, she said to Caleb over the boy's head. Can't speak Apache ever, not even when alone. Too dangerous. She was right, but it seemed cruel another loss piled on so many losses. To lose your language was to lose part of your soul, yet that's exactly what survival demanded. That night, they held a strange ceremony. Leia gathered all their Apache things, the few items they'd managed to keep, including traditional clothing and Tocho's small medicine bag. She explained in mixed Spanish and English that they had to hide these things, keep them secret until the world changed. We don't forget, she said firmly to Tocho. We just hide, like rabbits hide from hawks. Someday when safe, we remember everything. They buried the items in a box beneath the floorboards, a secret treasure that might never be retrieved. Tocho cried again quietly this time, and even Rena had tears on her cheeks. I'm sorry, Caleb said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. Don't apologize for keeping us alive, Leia replied sharply. Then softer. We knew the cost when we chose to stay. The next weeks fell into a pattern of careful practice and constant vigilance. Leia drilled Tocho in Spanish relentlessly, teaching him not just words, but the accent, the rhythm of the language. She and Rena worked on their own Spanish, too, adding Mexican phrases and expressions that would make their story more convincing. Caleb took Tocho Tomas with him on his ranch work, teaching him the things a Mexican boy would know rather than what an Apache boy would learn. How to rope cattle instead of hunt deer. How to mend fence instead of track prey. How to be someone he wasn't. The boy adapted with heartbreaking speed. Children were resilient, as Leia had said, but watching Tocho bury his Apache self deeper each day was painful. Sometimes Caleb caught him staring at the mountains with such longing it made his chest ache. You miss them, Caleb said one day as they repaired a section of fence. Tocho looked at him warily, then nodded. It's all right to miss them, Caleb continued. I miss people too. My wife. The life I thought I'd have. Will I forget? Tocho asked in his improving English. Will I forget how to be Apache? No, Caleb said firmly. You might forget some words, some customs, but Apache is in your blood, in your bones. That doesn't go away just because you have to hide it for a while. Mama says hiding keeps us safe. Your mother is wise, Caleb agreed, but being safe and being happy aren't always the same thing. Are you happy? The boy asked with the directness of children. Caleb considered the question. Was he happy? Happier than he'd been in 2 years, certainly. The cabin full of life purpose returned to his days. But happiness seemed too simple a word for the complex mix of grief, hope, fear, and growing affection he felt. I'm learning to be, he said finally. Same as you. The relationship between Caleb and Leia evolved slowly, carefully, like two wounded animals learning to trust. They worked together with increasing rhythm, she anticipating his needs around the ranch, he providing the protection and legitimacy her family needed. But underneath the practical partnership, something else was growing. He caught himself watching her when she didn't know, admiring the grace with which she moved the way lamplight caught in her dark hair. She had a way of humming while she worked Apache melodies, given Spanish words, creating something entirely new. For her part, Leia seemed to be studying him just as carefully. He'd catch her eyes on him as he taught Tocho, see something soft in her expression when he was patient with the boy's mistakes. Once, when he'd cut his hand on barbed wire, she'd tended the wound with gentle efficiency, her fingers on his skin sending unexpected warmth through him. "You're a good man," she said that night as she wrapped his hand. "I'm trying to be," he replied. "No," she said firmly. "You are. Bad men don't try. They just take, destroy. You build. You protect." "Your husband protected too," Caleb said carefully. They rarely spoke of the dead, as if mentioning them might conjure their ghosts. "Yes," Leia agreed. "He died protecting, but you live protecting. This is harder, I think. Dying for something is one moment of courage. Living for something takes courage every day." Her words stayed with him through the night, through the following days. He'd thought himself a coward for surviving when Martha died, for continuing to breathe when she couldn't. But maybe Leia was right. Maybe living took its own kind of courage. Hernandez returned 3 weeks after the soldiers' visit, his wagon fuller than usual. He greeted Leia and Rena in Spanish, playing along with their Mexican identity without missing a beat. "A Senor Warren's cousins from Sonora," he said with elaborate courtesy. "I heard in town about your arrival. Such a tragedy about your husbands. Bandits are a plague on both sides of the border." "You're very kind," Leia replied in Spanish, playing her role perfectly. But when Caleb walked Hernandez back to his wagon, the trader dropped his jovial mask. "The soldiers are asking questions in town," he said quietly. "About your sudden Mexican family. Some people find it suspicious a man who's been alone for 2 years suddenly having cousins appear." "What are they saying, Beth?" Caleb asked. "Nothing specific yet. But Sergeant McKenna, he's like a dog with a bone. Keeps coming back to questions about Apache in the area about that attack on the patrol. We had nothing to do with that." "I know," Hernandez said, "but knowing and proving are different things. Be careful, my friend. Maybe your cousins should be seen in town soon. Let people meet them. See, they're just Mexican women trying to survive. Mystery makes people suspicious. Familiarity makes them comfortable." It was good advice, though the thought of taking Leia and the others to town filled Caleb with dread. Too many things could go wrong, too many ways for their deception to fail. But Hernandez was right. Hiding would only fuel suspicion. They needed to be seen to become part of the fabric of local life rather than mysterious strangers on Caleb's ranch. "We'll go next week," Caleb decided, "for supplies and church." "Church is good," Hernandez agreed. "Mexicans are Catholic. Being seen at Mass will help your story." After the trader left, Caleb explained the situation to Leia and Rena. Both women looked apprehensive, but they understood the necessity. "We need better clothes," Leia said practically. "Mexican clothes, not Apache wearing white people's clothes." "Hernandez can get them," Caleb said, "but it'll cost." "Then we work more," Rena said firmly. "We earn our way." And they did. Over the next days, the women threw themselves into ranch work with renewed energy. Rena proved especially talented with the horses gentling a half-wild mare Caleb had given up on. Leia organized the household with efficiency that would have impressed Martha somehow, making their meager supplies stretch further than seemed possible. Tocho worked just as hard, following Caleb like a shadow, learning everything he could about ranching. The boy was smart, picking up skills quickly, but Caleb could see the cost of constant vigilance in his eyes. He never fully relaxed, always watching for danger, always ready to run or hide. "Does it get easier, Sit?" Tocho asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. "What? Being someone else, pretending all the time." Caleb thought about his own pretense, the strong, solitary rancher who needed no one the mask he'd worn since Martha's death. "Sometimes we pretend so long it becomes real," he said, "but that doesn't mean we forget who we really are inside." "I don't want to forget," Tocho said fiercely. "Then don't. Hold on to it here." Caleb touched his chest, "where no one can take it from you." The day of their town visit arrived gray and threatening rain. They dressed carefully in the Mexican clothing Hernandez had procured, long skirts and blouses for the women, proper trousers, and a clean shirt for Tocho. Caleb wore his best clothes, trying to look like a respectable rancher bringing his family to town. The ride took 3 hours, the wagon jolting over rough roads. Toko sat between Caleb and Leia on the bench while Rena rode in the back. They'd rehearsed their story so many times it should have felt natural, but tension radiated from all of them. Prescott appeared gradually, buildings emerging from the desert like ideas becoming solid. It wasn't a large town, but after weeks of isolation it seemed enormous and threatening. People on the streets turned to look at their wagon, curiosity plain on their faces. Their first stop was the general store where Mrs. Henderson held court. The widow who'd been mentioned as a potential match for Caleb looked at Leia with barely concealed hostility. "Mr. Warren," she said coolly, "I heard you had visitors." "My cousins," Caleb said evenly, "from my mother's side. Elena Rosa and Elena San Tomas." "Cousins?" Mrs. Henderson repeated her tone, making it clear she didn't believe a word. "How convenient they appeared just when you needed help with the ranch." "A family helps family," Leia said in accented English. "Is this not true here too?" Mrs. Henderson's face reddened slightly. "Of course. I just find it curious that Mr. Warren never mentioned Mexican relations before." "My mother didn't speak of her family much," Caleb lied smoothly. "She married young, left that life behind. But blood is blood." They completed their shopping under Mrs. Henderson's suspicious gaze, buying supplies they needed, and some they didn't just to appear normal. Tocho stayed close to his mother, playing his part perfectly as a shy Mexican boy overwhelmed by town. The Catholic Church was their next stop. Father Miguel, an elderly priest from New Mexico, greeted them warmly. If he had any suspicions about their story, he didn't show it. "It's good to see you in God's house, Mr. Warren," he said. "And with family, too. God smiles on families." They sat through Mass following the rhythms of Catholic worship that Leia had frantically tried to teach herself from memory of long-ago encounters with Mexican traders. Tocho fidgeted like any young boy would, and Rena kept her eyes downcast, playing the part of a grieving widow perfectly. After Mass, several Mexican families approached them speaking rapid Spanish that tested Leia and Rena's improving skills. But they managed, and Caleb could see some of the tension leaving the other parishioners' faces. These newcomers were being accepted by their own kind, which went a long way toward establishing legitimacy. It was at the Mercantile, their last stop, that real trouble found them. Caleb was negotiating for grain when he heard Tocho cry out. He turned to find Private Collins, the young soldier from McKenna's unit, holding the boy's arm. "This kid was stealing," Collins announced loudly. "Caught him red-handed with candy in his pocket." "I wasn't," Tocho protested in English. Then caught himself and switched to Spanish. "No robe nada." Leia was there instantly, maternal fury overcoming caution. "Let go of my son." "Your son's a thief, ma'am," Collins said, not releasing Tocho. Indian blood always shows itself eventually. Something in Caleb snapped. He crossed the store in 3 strides, his hand closing on Collins' wrist, hard enough to make the soldier wince. "Let him go." Each word was distinct dangerous. Collins released Tocho, who ran to his mother, but the soldier's face was ugly with suspicion. "Protective of your cousin's half-breed boy. Aren't you, Warren?" "He's a child," Caleb said coldly. "And you're wrong about the candy. I told him he could have it. Perhaps you should check your facts before making accusations." The store owner, Mr. Pritchard, cleared his throat nervously. "There does seem to be a misunderstanding. The boy did ask about the candy, and Mr. Warren did nod. I saw it myself." It was a lie. Pritchard had been in the back room, but the merchant clearly didn't want trouble in his store. Collins looked around, realizing he was outnumbered and looking foolish. "My mistake," he said grudgingly. "But you should watch that boy. Mixed blood makes them unpredictable." After Collins left, they completed their purchases quickly and headed home. Tocho was quiet, pressed against his mother's side, and Caleb could feel the fear radiating from all of them. "He knows," Rena said once they were out of town. "That soldier knows." "He suspects," Caleb corrected, "but suspicion isn't proof." "It's enough to get us killed," Leah said flatly. She was right, and they all knew it. The confrontation with Collins had been dangerous, potentially fatal to their charade. But seeing the soldier grab Tocho, hearing him call the boy a half-breed, had triggered something protective in Caleb that overrode caution. That night, after Tocho was asleep, the adults sat around the table in the lamplight, speaking in whispers. "We should leave," Rena said. "Go to Mexico with the others." "And live how?" Leah countered. "Always running, always afraid." "Better than being caught here," Rena argued. "Is it?" Leah turned to Caleb. "What do you think?" He was quiet for a moment, weighing their options. "I think Collins will report to McKenna. I think they'll watch us more closely now, but I also think running makes us look guilty. If we continue our routine act like we have nothing to hide, we gamble with our lives," Rena finished. "We're already gambling," Caleb pointed out. "The question is whether better odds lie in running or staying." They talked until late, going in circles, finding no perfect answer because there wasn't one. Finally exhausted, they agreed to wait to watch, to be ready to run if necessary, but not to panic without cause. As they prepared to sleep, Leah touched Caleb's arm. "Thank you for defending Tomas. Caleb paused, not sure what word to use. "He's important to me. You all are." "We're supposed to be your cousins," Leah said with a small smile. "Family helps family remember." "Is that what we are?" Caleb asked quietly. "Family." Leah looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her dark eyes. "I think maybe we're becoming that, or something like it." She moved away before he could respond, but her words lingered in the air like a promise or a possibility. The next days passed in tense normalcy. They worked the ranch, maintained their routine, waited for something to happen. Caleb found himself checking the horizon constantly, expecting to see soldiers approaching. But it wasn't soldiers who came. It was Nantan. The old Apache appeared at dawn 5 days after their town visit, materializing from the desert like a ghost. Caleb nearly shot him before recognizing the weathered face. "What are you doing here?" Caleb asked urgently. "It's not safe." "Nowhere is safe for Apache," Nantan replied. "But I had to come, had to warn." He explained quickly. The group heading for Mexico had been attacked by Mexican soldiers just across the border. Ayana was dead along with one of her children. The others had scattered. Tula was missing. The survivors had fled back north, were hiding in the canyon lands, again wounded and desperate. "Oh God," Leah breathed when she heard about her sister. "Tula, she might have survived," Nantan said, but his tone suggested he doubted it. Some ran different directions. "What will you do?" Caleb asked. "Die, probably," Nantan said with his bitter smile. "But die free, not on reservation." "You could stay here," Caleb offered, knowing, even as he said it, how impossible that would be. Hiding 2 Apache women and a child as Mexican was hard enough. Hiding an old Apache warrior was impossible. "No," Nantan said. "You already risked too much. But I wanted you to know. Wanted Leah to know about Tula." He gave Leah something, a small beaded bracelet. "Tula's. She wanted Leah to have if something happened." Leah took it with shaking hands, tears running down her face. Rena held her sister as she sobbed, their grief fresh and sharp. "There's more," Nantan said grimly. "The army knows about you, about Warren hiding Apache. Mexican soldiers told them, trying to curry favor. They're coming." "When?" Caleb asked, his blood running cold. "Soon. Days, maybe. Maybe less." They had to run. There was no choice now. Their carefully constructed fiction wouldn't hold against soldiers who knew the truth. "We'll leave tonight," Caleb decided. "Head north into the mountains. I know places we can hide." "For how long?" Leah asked through her tears. "As long as necessary," Caleb said, though he knew that might mean forever. They spent the day in frantic preparation, packing only essentials. Caleb felt a pang leaving the cabin, this place where he'd lived with Martha, where he'd found unexpected family with Leah and the others. But places were just wood and stone. People were what mattered. As the sun set, they loaded the wagon with their supplies. Caleb saddled Buck as well, knowing they might need to split up, might need the speed a horse could provide. "I'm scared," Tocho admitted as they prepared to leave. "So am I," Caleb told him honestly. But being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Being brave means doing what needs to be done even when you're scared. Will we ever come back? Caleb looked at the cabin at this place that had been home. Maybe. Someday. When the world changes. When will that be? I don't know, Caleb admitted, but it will change. It always does. They were just about to leave when they heard horses approaching fast. Many horses. Caleb's heart sank. Too late. They'd waited too long. Hide, he told Leia urgently. Root cellar now. Not without you, she protested. I can talk to them, delay them. You hide. Keep Tomas safe. She looked like she wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The horses were getting closer. She grabbed Tocho and Rena, and they disappeared into the cabin. Caleb stood in front of his door rifle in hand, but not raised as 15 cavalry soldiers rode into his yard. McKenna led them, his face grim with purpose. Warren, he said without preamble, we know you're harboring Apache fugitives. Bring them out now, and I might be able to argue for leniency for you. I don't know what you're talking about, Caleb said evenly. My Mexican cousins are here legally. Don't insult my intelligence, McKenna snapped. We have testimony from Mexican army officers. They encountered your Apache friends at the border, described them perfectly. An Apache woman and her sister traveling with a boy. Ring any bells? Mexican officers can be mistaken, Caleb said. My cousins are from Sonora. Enough. McKenna cut him off. Search the property. He ordered his men. Find them. The soldiers dismounted, spreading out with practiced efficiency. Caleb's mind raced, trying to think of something, anything that might save them. It was Tocho who saved them in the end. The boy emerged from the cabin before the soldiers entered, walking calmly, despite what must have been terrible fear. But what stopped everyone cold was what he was saying, or rather singing. It was a Mexican ballad, one Hernandez had taught him, sung in perfect Spanish with a child's clear voice. He walked right up to McKenna's horse, still singing, and held up something, a rosary. Por favor, señor, he said when the song ended. My mother is at prayer. Today is the anniversary of my father's death, the day the bandits killed him. Please let her finish her prayers. It was brilliant. A Mexican boy, obviously Catholic, speaking perfect Spanish, asking for respect for his grieving mother. Several of the soldiers actually looked uncomfortable. McKenna wasn't convinced. Where is she, boy? Inside, señor, with my tia. They pray for the dead. At that moment, Leia's voice came from the cabin reciting the Ave Maria in Latin. Rena's voice joined her, the two women creating a haunting harmony that spoke of genuine faith and grief. Even McKenna hesitated. Interrupting prayers for the dead was the kind of thing that created bad stories, the kind that followed a man's military career. Collins, he said finally, go inside. Respectfully. Check their identity. Collins dismounted, looking uncertain. The prayers continued, never faltering. He entered the cabin, and Caleb held his breath. A long moment passed. Then Collins emerged, his face red. Well, McKenna demanded. Two Mexican women, Sergeant, on their knees before a cross. They're wearing veils, but they looked Mexican to me. Veils. Clever Leia using fabric to hide their faces in a way that would seem natural for grieving Catholic women. McKenna wasn't satisfied. I want to see them myself. But before he could dismount, another voice called out from the road. Hernandez's wagon was approaching, and with him was Father Miguel from the church. Sergeant McKenna, the priest called out. I heard you were coming here. I wanted to ensure my parishioners were treated with respect. Your parishioners? McKenna said skeptically. Of course. Elena and Rosa have been faithful attendees at Mass, good Catholic women who've suffered much. The priest climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for his age. Surely you're not harassing them on the anniversary of such tragedy. We had reports, McKenna began. Reports can be mistaken, Father Miguel said firmly. I know these women. I've heard their confessions, given them communion. They are who they say they are. It was a lie, of course. But a priest's word carried weight, especially in territorial Arizona, where the Catholic Church still held significant influence. McKenna looked around at his men, at the priest, at Tocho, still clutching his rosary, at Caleb standing firm in his doorway. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. "Perhaps we were given false information," McKenna said, finally, the words clearly bitter in his mouth. "My apologies for the disturbance." He turned his horse sharply. "Mount up!" he barked at his men. As they rode away, Caleb's knees nearly buckled with relief. Father Miguel watched them go, then turned to Caleb with knowing eyes. "God protects the innocent," he said simply, "and sometimes he uses old priests to do it." "Father, I know nothing," Father Miguel interrupted. "I know only that there are women and a child here who need sanctuary, who need time to grieve and heal. The church has always provided such sanctuary." He climbed back onto Hernandez's wagon. "But Sergeant McKenna is a persistent man. He'll be back. Perhaps your cousins should consider a pilgrimage soon. Mexico has many holy sites where one might pray for an extended time." The message was clear. They'd won this battle, but not the war. McKenna would return better prepared with more evidence. They had to leave. That night they sat together in the cabin that now felt more like a trap than a home. Tocho had been brave beyond his years, but now he cried in his mother's arms, the stress finally overwhelming him. "You saved us," Caleb told him. That was quick thinking with the rosary and the song. "Senor Hernandez taught me," Tocho said through his tears. "He said sometimes being Mexican could save my life." "He was right," Leia said, kissing her son's head. "You were perfect." "But they'll be back," Rena said quietly. The soldier McKenna he didn't believe. "No," Caleb agreed. "We have maybe 2 days before he finds a way around Father Miguel's protection." "Then we run," Leia said simply. "North to mountains, like you said. Or south to Mexico," Caleb suggested. Father Miguel mentioned pilgrimage sites. He was telling us the church could help us get across the border safely. They debated through the night. North meant hiding in harsh country with winter coming. South meant crossing back through the territory that had already claimed Tula and Ayana. Neither option offered much hope. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally overtook them. They'd made no decision, found no perfect path forward. Caleb dozed in his chair, jerking awake when he heard horses again. But it wasn't soldiers this time. It was a single rider moving fast. Caleb grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, then lowered it in shock. It was Tula, Leia's youngest sister, the one they'd thought dead. She was injured, exhausted, her clothes torn and bloodied, but alive. She practically fell from her stolen horse, gasping out words in Apache. Leia and Rena ran to her, all three sisters crying and embracing. "She says Mexican traders helped her," Leia translated through tears. "Hid her, gave her a horse. She's been riding for 3 days to get here." They carried Tula inside, tended her injuries. She had a bullet wound in her shoulder, infected and angry-looking. Fever burned in her eyes, but she was conscious, coherent. "The others?" Caleb asked gently. Tula spoke. Leia translated, and the story that emerged was one of horror and surprising kindness. The Mexican soldiers had attacked without warning. Ayana had died protecting her children, managing to hide one while sacrificing herself for the other. The hidden child had been found by Mexican peasants who took pity and were hiding her still. Some had escaped into the desert. Some had been captured. Tula had been shot but managed to reach a trade caravan whose leader, surprisingly, had helped her rather than turning her in for a bounty. "There are good people everywhere," Leia said wonderingly, "even in the worst times." "But now we have bigger problem," Rena pointed out. "Tula can't travel, can't pretend to be Mexican, can barely stay conscious." She was right. Tula's presence made their situation even more precarious. A wounded Apache woman couldn't be explained away as a Mexican cousin, and she needed medical care beyond what they could provide. "Hernandez," Caleb said suddenly. "He knows a doctor in Tucson who doesn't ask questions. If we can get her there—" "It's 5 days' travel," Leia said. "She might not survive." "She won't survive here," Caleb said grimly. "McKenna comes back, finds her, we're all finished." They had to split up. It was the only way. Someone had to take Tula to the doctor, while the others either hid or fled. But who would go where? The decision, when it came, surprised everyone, including Caleb. "I'll take Tula to Tucson," Rena announced. I can pass for Mexican better now. Say she's my sister injured by bandits. It's too dangerous, Leia protested. Everything is dangerous, Rena countered. But this gives her a chance, gives all of us a chance. She was right, and they all knew it. With Rena gone, Watula, Leia, and Tocho could maintain their cover more easily. 3 people were less suspicious than 5, especially if one was obviously Apache. They prepared quickly. Hernandez had left his old wagon taking Caleb's in trade. It was more broken down but less recognizable. Rena would take it along with most of their medical supplies and what money Caleb had saved. If something goes wrong, Caleb told her, get to Father Miguel's church in Tucson. He'll have gotten word from our Father Miguel. He'll help. Rena nodded, her face set with determination. She'd changed so much from the traumatized woman who'd arrived weeks ago. Necessity had made her strong, or maybe revealed strength that was always there. As they loaded Tula into the wagon, barely conscious but stable for the moment, Leia embraced both her sisters. Survive, she whispered fiercely. Both of you survive. You too, Rena replied. All of you. They watched the wagon disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying 2 women toward uncertain fate. Caleb felt the weight of chances, narrowing options disappearing. They were running out of time, out of luck, out of hope. What now? Tocho asked in small voice. Caleb looked at the boy, at Leia, at the cabin that had sheltered them all. What now, indeed? The silence after Rena's departure felt heavier than the desert heat that was already building despite the early hour. Caleb stood with Leia and Toko, watching the dust settle back onto the road as if the wagon had never passed. 3 of them now, a number that felt both more manageable and more vulnerable. We should go inside, Leia said quietly, her hand on Tocho's shoulder. Make plans. But before they could move, Buck whinnied sharply from the corral. Caleb turned to see another dust cloud on the horizon, this one moving fast from the direction of town. His stomach dropped. McKenna wouldn't have waited even 2 days. Hide, he told Leia urgently. Take Toko to the root cellar. No, she said firmly. We stand together now. Running makes us look guilty. She was right, though every instinct screamed at him to get them hidden. They stood as a family would, watching the approaching rider with apparent calm while their hearts raced. But it wasn't soldiers. It was Hernandez riding hard on a horse Caleb didn't recognize. The trader pulled up sharp, his usual jovial manner replaced by urgency. You need to leave, now, he said without preamble. McKenna is getting a warrant from the territorial judge. He'll be here by noon with authority to arrest all of you. How do you know this? Caleb asked. I have friends in many places, Hernandez said. Friends who think what's happening to the Apache is wrong even if they can't say so publicly. They sent me to warn you. We can't leave, Leia said. Not yet. Rena just left with... She caught herself, but Hernandez waved his hand. I know about the wounded sister. I'm the one who told Rena about the doctor in Tucson. But you 3 need to disappear before McKenna gets here. Where? Caleb asked. North to the mountains, south to Mexico. Neither, Hernandez said, surprising them. East, to New Mexico territory. I have family there in a town called Las Cruces. They'll take you in, help you establish new identities. Why? Leia asked suspiciously. Why would you risk so much for us? Hernandez was quiet for a moment, then spoke with unusual seriousness. 20 years ago, Apache saved my life. I was young, stupid, lost in the desert. A band found me, fed me, guided me to safety. The old chief said someday I would have a chance to repay the debt. He looked at Tocho. That boy there, he's the grandson of that chief. I recognized him the first time I saw him, though I said nothing. Tocho's eyes widened. You knew my grandfather. Cochise was a great man, Hernandez said simply, and now I repay my debt to him by helping his family survive. Cochise. Caleb had heard the name, of course. One of the great Apache leaders dead now, several years. That Toko was his grandson explained much about the boy's bearing the natural leadership, even at such a young age. We'll need a wagon, Caleb said, his mind already working through logistics. Already arranged, Hernandez said. Hidden in the canyon 2 miles east, supplies too, and papers that should pass inspection. You're now the Martinez family heading to Las Cruces for a funeral. Grief explains much why you travel quickly, why you don't want to talk to strangers. You've thought of everything, Leia said wonderingly. I've been planning since the day McKenna first came here, Hernandez admitted. I knew this moment would arrive. They had less than 3 hours. Caleb felt the weight of leaving everything he'd built with Martha, everything they'd planned and dreamed. But as he looked at Leia and Tocho, he realized he wasn't leaving his family. He was taking them with him. They packed with desperate efficiency, taking only what they absolutely needed. The cabin that had been home would stand empty, a monument to lives that had passed through and moved on. Caleb found himself standing in the doorway, looking at the bed where Martha had died, where Tocho had recovered, where so much life and death had played out. She would understand, Leia said softly, coming to stand beside him. I know, Caleb replied. She always said home wasn't a place, but the people you're with. Wise woman. She would have liked you, Caleb said. Would have admired your strength. And I would have liked her, Leia replied. Any woman who could capture your heart must have been special. They looked at each other for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Tocho called urgently from outside. He'd spotted dust in the distance. Time had run out. They rode hard for the canyon, Caleb on Buck with their essential supplies, Leia and Tocho on the horse Hernandez had brought. The trader himself had already gone creating an alibi by being visibly in town when McKenna arrived at the empty ranch. The wagon was where promised, loaded with supplies and pulled by 2 sturdy mules. The papers were masterfully forged. Caleb was now Carlos Martinez. Leia was his wife, Elena Tocho, their son, Tomas. A letter explained they were traveling to Las Cruces for the funeral of Carlos's mother. Can you do this? Caleb asked Leia as they transferred into their new roles. Pretend to be my wife. I've pretended harder things, she said. Can you pretend to be my husband? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. They'd been dancing around their growing feelings for weeks, held back by grief, by circumstance, by fear. Now, necessity pushed them into roles that didn't feel entirely like pretending. Yes, Caleb said simply. I can do that. They traveled through the day's heat, keeping to back trails Hernandez had marked on a rough map. Tocho slept in the wagon bed, exhausted by stress and fear. Leia sat beside Caleb on the bench, and he was acutely aware of her presence, the way her shoulder occasionally brushed his as the wagon swayed. Tell me about Las Cruces, she said as they stopped to rest the mules. I've never been there, Caleb admitted. But Hernandez says it's growing fast. Railroads coming through bringing opportunities. Easier to blend in when a town's expanding. And we'll do what they're... Live, Caleb said. Ranch maybe if we can get land. Or I can work for others until we save enough. You could take in washing or sewing. Such an ordinary life, Leia said, but she was smiling slightly. It sounds wonderful. After everything we've been through, ordinary sounds perfect. They were making good time when Toko suddenly pointed behind them. Riders. Caleb's heart sank as he saw the dust cloud. 3 riders moving fast, gaining on them. The wagon couldn't outrun horses, especially not loaded as it was. Under the tarp, he told Leia and Tocho urgently. Hide among the supplies. We face them together, Leia insisted. Please, Caleb said. If it's soldiers, they're looking for a white man with Apache. If they just see a Mexican man alone... She understood the logic, though he could see she hated it. She and Toko slipped under the canvas that covered their supplies, becoming invisible lumps among the boxes and bags. Caleb forced himself to appear calm as the riders approached. But as they got closer, he realized with relief they weren't soldiers. They were cowboys, rough-looking men, probably from one of the big ranches in the area. Hold up there, the lead rider called out. He was a weathered man with cold eyes and a tied-down gun that suggested he was used to using it. Buenos dias, señores, Caleb said in Spanish-accented English. Is there a problem? You tell us, the leader said. Road's been closed. Army business. Nobody's supposed to be traveling this way. I know nothing of this, Caleb said, letting worry creep into his voice. My mother, she dies in Las Cruces. We must get to the funeral. The second rider, younger and meaner looking, circled the wagon slowly. What's under the canvas? Supplies, senor, food for the journey, gifts for the family. Let's see, the mean one said, reaching for the tarp. Caleb's hand moved to the pistol at his hip, hidden beneath his serape. But before violence could erupt, the third rider spoke up. "Leave it, Jake. Man's got a right to travel to his mother's funeral." "Shut up, Williams," Jake snarled. "Could be anybody under there. Could be them Apache the Army's looking for." "Apache traveling with a Mexican," Williams said skeptically. "Use your brain." "I'll use your brain splattered on a rock," Jake threatened, but the leader held up his hand. "Check it, Nim," he told Jake. "But be quick. We've got our own business to tend." Jake yanked back the canvas, and Caleb held his breath. Leia and Tocho must have burrowed deep because Jake saw only supplies. He poked around half-heartedly, then spat in disgust. "Nothing but Mexican junk." "Then we're done here," the leader said. He looked at Caleb with those cold eyes. "You see any Apache, any soldiers, anybody at all, you didn't see us." "Understand?" "Si, senor. I see nothing." "Smart Mexican," Jake said with an ugly laugh. "Best kind is the blind kind." They rode off fast, heading south toward Mexico. Caleb waited until they were well gone before calling Leia and Tocho out. "Bandits," he said, "or rustlers, running from something." "Lucky for us," Leia said. "They weren't looking for Apache, just avoiding the law themselves." They continued east, the landscape gradually changing from desert to grassland. As the sun began to set, they found a sheltered spot near a small stream to make camp. They couldn't risk a fire, the smoke might attract attention, so they ate cold food and huddled together for warmth as the temperature dropped. "Tell me about your grandfather," Caleb said to Tocho. "About Cochise." The boy's eyes lit up. "He was the greatest warrior ever. Fought the Mexicans, the Americans, everybody who tried to take Apache land." "He was more than a warrior," Leia added softly. "He was a leader who tried to find peace. Signed treaties, tried to protect his people through diplomacy when war became impossible to win." "But they betrayed him," Tocho said angrily. "Broke their promises." "Yes," Leia agreed. "They did, but he kept trying until he died because he knew his people's survival was more important than his pride." "Is that what we're doing?" Tocho asked. "Surviving instead of fighting." "Sometimes surviving is fighting," Caleb said. "Every Apache child who grows up remembers that's a victory against those who want your people to disappear." "But I have to pretend to be Mexican." "For now," Leia said. "But inside in your heart, you're still Apache, still the grandson of Cochise. That can never be taken from you." They slept close together that night, ostensibly for warmth, but really for comfort. Caleb woke once to find Leia watching the stars, tears on her cheeks. "Thinking about your sisters?" he asked quietly. "Wondering if they're alive," she admitted. "If Rena made it to Tucson, if Tula survived, if I'll ever see them again." "You will," Caleb said with more confidence than he felt. "Hernandez will get word to us once they're safe. You have such faith in him. He's proven himself, and he has his own honor debt to fulfill." "Apache honor and Mexican honor and American honor," Leia said. "All different, all the same. Men trying to be good in a world that makes it hard." "What about women's honor?" Caleb asked. "Women don't have the luxury of honor," Leia said bitterly. "We have survival. We have children to protect. We have to be practical while men die for principles." "That's not fair." "No," she agreed, "but it's true. Your Martha, did she want you to come to this territory?" The question surprised him. "No," he admitted. "She wanted to stay in Missouri near her family, but I had dreams of land, of building something. And she came because she loved you, set aside what she wanted for what you needed." Leia's voice held no accusation, just understanding. "That's what women do." "Is that what you're doing? Setting aside what you want?" Leia was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't know what I want anymore. My old life is dead. My husband is dead. My world is gone. Now I just want Toko to live, to grow up, to have children of his own someday. Everything else is—" She paused, searching for words, "uncertain." "I'm certain about one thing," Caleb said carefully. "I'm certain I want you and Toko in my life. However that happens, whatever we have to pretend to be." She turned to look at him in the darkness. "Even if I can never love you the way you deserve, the way Martha loved you." "Even then," Caleb said, though the words hurt, Though I hope someday, someday, she repeated softly. Such a dangerous word, so full of hope that might never come true. They didn't speak more, but she moved closer to him, her head finding his shoulder. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust, and for now, that was enough. The second day of travel brought new challenges. They encountered a patrol of soldiers at a crossroads checking all travelers. Caleb's heart pounded as they approached, but the forged papers held up to scrutiny. The sergeant barely glanced at them. A Mexican family heading to a funeral was too common to be suspicious. "Any trouble on the road?" the sergeant asked in broken Spanish. "No, señor," Caleb replied. "Very quiet. You see any Apache, you tell us quick. Comprende? Si, señor. Apache very bad." The sergeant nodded, satisfied with the response, and waved them through. After they were out of earshot, Tocho said quietly, "I wanted to tell him I was Apache, that Apache aren't bad." "I know," Leia said, "but living is more important than pride right now. Grandfather wouldn't have lied." "Your grandfather did what he had to for his people to survive," Leia said firmly, "just as we're doing." They made good progress through the day, the landscape continuing to change around them. The mountains receded, replaced by vast grasslands that stretched to the horizon. It was beautiful in a different way from the desert full of possibility. That night they camped near a trading post, though they didn't go in. Too many questions might be asked. Too many people might remember them. Instead, they watched from a distance as travelers came and went, living their normal lives without fear of discovery. "What do you think Rena and Tula are doing now?" Tocho asked as they ate their simple meal. "Rena is probably arguing with the doctor about payment," Leia said with a small smile. "She never likes to owe anyone anything, and Tula is probably complaining about having to stay in bed." "If they're alive," Tocho said quietly. "They're alive," Leia said firmly. "I would know if they weren't. I would feel it." Caleb understood that certainty. After Martha died, he'd known the moment she was gone, even before the doctor confirmed it. There was an emptiness that announced itself, a hollow echo where connection used to be. On the third day, they encountered their worst challenge yet. A group of Apache scouts working for the army stopped them. The irony was bitter. Apache hunting Apache, forced to track their own people for the white man's army. The lead scout was older, his face weathered and unreadable. He questioned them in Spanish, then suddenly switched to Apache, directing his words at Leia. She didn't react, didn't show any sign of understanding, though. Caleb saw her hands clench in her lap. The scout repeated his words louder this time. "No comprendo," Leia said in Spanish. "Español o inglés, por favor." The scout studied her for a long moment, and Caleb was certain they were discovered. This man knew. He had to know. Apache would recognize Apache no matter the disguise. But then the scout did something unexpected. He nodded slowly and said in Spanish, "My mistake, señora. You reminded me of someone. Safe travels." He waved his men on, and they rode away without looking back. Caleb didn't dare speak until they were long gone, and when he did, his voice shook. He knew. "Yes," Leia agreed, "but he let us go." "Why?" "Because he's Apache forced to hunt Apache. Maybe he's tired of finding us." She touched the hidden medicine bag at her chest, the one thing she'd kept from her old life. "Or maybe the spirits protected us." "Or maybe," Tocho said with wisdom beyond his years, he saw a family trying to survive and decided that was more important than army orders. They pushed harder after that encounter, wanting to put distance between themselves and anyone who might change their mind about letting them pass. The mules were tired, but they kept going, driven by fear and hope in equal measure. On the fourth night, disaster nearly struck. They'd made camp in what seemed like a sheltered grove of cottonwoods, but they woke to find themselves surrounded by armed men. Not soldiers, not cowboys. These were comancheros, the mixed-blood traders who dealt in goods, and people with equal indifference. "Well, well," their leader said in accented English, "what have we here?" He was a big man, half Mexican, half something else, with scars that told stories of violence. His men were a mixed bunch, white Mexican Indian, united only in their dangerous appearance. "We're just travelers," Caleb said carefully in his Mexican accent. Going to Las Cruces for a funeral. Funeral, the leader repeated with a grin that held no humor. Maybe your own, eh? His men laughed an ugly sound in the pre-dawn darkness. Caleb's hand inched toward his gun, but there were too many of them. Fighting meant dying. We have little money, Leia said suddenly in Spanish. But you can have it. We just want to pass safely. The leader's attention fixed on her, and Caleb saw the interest flare in his eyes. Pretty woman, worth more than money. She's my wife, Caleb said sharply, dropping the accent in his anger. Wife, the leader mused. Wives can be sold, especially pretty Mexican wives. Good market in Mexico for such things. Try it, Caleb said coldly, and I'll kill you. You'll die trying. Maybe, but I'll take you with me. They stared at each other, violence trembling in the air between them. Then Toko did something that surprised everyone. He started coughing horrible, racking coughs that sounded like his lungs were tearing apart. The sickness, Leia said quickly, understanding his ploy. My son has the lung sickness. Very contagious. We go to Las Cruces for the healing waters. The Comancheros stepped back instinctively. Disease was the one enemy they couldn't fight, couldn't intimidate. Tuberculosis consumption, whatever you called it, it killed without regard for toughness or skill with a gun. Tocho's coughing got worse, and he spat into his hand, showing red that looked like blood, but Caleb realized was probably juice from the berries they'd eaten earlier. Get away from us, the leader said, all interest in robbery or kidnapping gone. Go now. They didn't need to be told twice. Caleb got the wagon moving while Toko continued his performance, coughing and moaning dramatically. They drove away fast, not stopping until the Comancheros were miles behind. That was brilliant, Caleb told Tocho when they finally stopped. The boy grinned. Grandfather once told me that sickness scares bad men more than guns. They can fight guns. They can't fight disease. Your grandfather was wise, Caleb said, and you're definitely his grandson. As they got closer to Las Cruces, the land began to show more signs of settlement. Farms appeared small but prosperous looking. They passed other travelers who nodded in greeting but didn't stop to talk. It was a relief to be just another family on the road, unremarkable and unmemorable. On the fifth day, they could see the town in the distance, larger than Caleb had expected. The railroad was indeed coming through, bringing prosperity and growth. It would be easier to disappear here to become just another immigrant family seeking a new life. But as they approached the outskirts, Leia suddenly grabbed Caleb's arm. Stop. What's wrong? There. She pointed to a small adobe church. We should pray. Give thanks for surviving the journey. Caleb understood. It wasn't really about prayer, but about establishing their Catholic identity immediately. Being seen at church would help their story make them part of the community from the start. The priest was young Irish from his accent, and he welcomed them warmly. Travelers, welcome to Las Cruces. What brings you to our town? We come for my mother's funeral, Caleb said in his Carlos Martinez voice, but also maybe to stay. We hear there's work here. Plenty of work, the priest confirmed. The railroad brings opportunities, and we always need good families in our parish. They knelt and prayed, or at least appeared to. Caleb found himself actually grateful they had survived against all odds. Maybe there was something to prayer after all. After church, they went to find Hernandez's family. The address was in the Mexican part of town, a small but clean house with flowers in the window. An elderly woman answered their knock, and her face lit up when Caleb gave the password Hernandez had provided. "You're the Martinez family," she exclaimed in Spanish. "My nephew told me to expect you. Come in, come in." Her name was Rosa Delgado, and she was Hernandez's aunt. Her husband had died years ago, and she lived alone, supplementing her income by taking in boarders. She'd prepared rooms for them, and there was food waiting, the first hot meal they'd had in days. "You'll be safe here," Rosa assured them. "This neighborhood, we protect our own. Nobody asks questions if I say your family." As they settled in that night in real beds with clean sheets, Caleb could hardly believe they'd made it. 5 days ago, they'd been about to be arrested. Now they were in a new place with new identities and a chance at a new life. Leia came to his room after Tocho was asleep. We need to talk about our story, she said. Rosa thinks we're married. Everyone will think that. We can say we're cousins if you prefer. No, Leia interrupted. That's more complicated, raises more questions. We should be what we're pretending to be, husband and wife. That's a big pretense, Caleb said carefully. Is it? Leia asked. We're already raising a child together. We're already protecting each other, depending on each other. We're already a family in every way but one. That one way matters, Caleb said. Does it? My husband is dead. Your wife is dead. We're alive and we have to live. She moved closer to him. I'm not saying I love you the way you might want, but I trust you. I respect you and I care for you. Isn't that enough to build on? It could be, Caleb said slowly, if you're sure. I'm sure about surviving, Leia said. I'm sure about keeping Toko safe. I'm sure about you being a good man who deserves more than pretense. She paused. Maybe we can make the pretense real given time. Time, Caleb repeated. We might actually have that now. Yes, Leia agreed. Time to breathe, to heal, to become whoever we're going to be. She left then, but the promise lingered. They were the Martinez family now, Carlos, Elena, and Tomas. The Warren Ranch was behind them, along with their Apache identity, their old lives. Tomorrow, they'd begin building new ones. That night, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Caleb slept without nightmares. No ghosts visited, no regrets haunted. There was only quiet, and the knowledge that in the next room slept people he'd come to love, people he'd protect with his life. The next morning brought the reality of their new existence. Caleb Carlos now went to seek work while Leia Elena took Tocho to enroll in the local school. The boy needed education, needed to perfect his English and Spanish, needed to be around other children. Caleb found work quickly at a livery stable. The owner, a German immigrant named Muller, needed someone who understood horses, and Caleb's obvious skill got him hired immediately. You work hard, I pay fair, what? Muller said in his thick accent. No questions about past if you do good work. It was perfect. Physical labor that would establish him in the community without requiring too much interaction. He could be the quiet, hardworking Mexican who kept to himself. When he returned to Rosa's house that evening, he found Leia teaching two neighbor women how to make the Apache bread she'd adapted to use Mexican ingredients. They were laughing, sharing stories, and for a moment Caleb saw who she might have been if her life had been different, social, warm, connected to community. Your wife is wonderful, one of the women told him. So kind, so helpful. You're lucky. Yes, Caleb agreed, watching Leia smile at something Tocho was saying. I'm very lucky. That night, as they ate dinner together in their small rooms, Toko talked excitedly about school. The teacher says I'm smart, says I learn fast. Of course you do, Leia said proudly. You're, she caught herself before saying grandson of Cochise, instead finishing my son. After Tocho was asleep, Caleb and Leia sat together in the small parlor Rosa had given them to use. It was domestic, peaceful, everything Caleb had lost when Martha died and thought he'd never have again. Rosa asked me today when we married, Leia said. I told her 5 years ago in Sonora. She wants to know why we don't wear rings. We could get some, Caleb suggested. Simple bands, nothing expensive. Is that what you want? To pretend that completely, I want whatever makes you comfortable, Caleb said. Whatever keeps us safe. Leia looked at him for a long moment. You know what would really keep us safe? Actually being married. Legal papers that say we're husband and wife. No questions then about our relationship. Caleb's heart jumped. Are you proposing? I'm being practical, Leia said, but there was something soft in her eyes. We're already living as married. Why not make it legal? Because you deserve better than a practical marriage, Caleb said. You deserve love, romance, choice. I choose this, Leia said firmly. I choose you. I choose safety for Toko. I choose to stop running and build something. She paused. Unless you don't want... I want... Caleb interrupted. God help me, I want. But I need you to be sure. I'm sure about today, Leia said. Tomorrow will take care of itself. They were married a week later by the Irish priest with Rosa and Mueller as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like Caleb's wedding to Martha had been. But when he slipped the plain band on Leah's finger and she did the same to him, something settled in his chest. Not completion, not the ending of grief, but the beginning of something new. Toko served as ring bearer, beaming with pride. To anyone watching, they were just another immigrant family formalizing their union. No one suspected the Apache woman and white man beneath the Mexican facade. That night, their wedding night, Leah came to his bed. Not with passion, but with quiet determination to make their marriage real in every way. "Are you sure?" Caleb asked one more time. "Stop asking that," she said with a small smile. "I'm your wife now. This is what wives do." It wasn't love-making so much as seal-making, a physical confirmation of their legal union. But there was tenderness in it, and comfort, and the promise that maybe someday it would be more. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Leah said quietly, "Martha was lucky to have been loved by you." "As your husband was lucky to have been loved by you," Caleb replied. "Maybe we're lucky too," she said, "in a different way." "Maybe we are." A month passed in relative peace. Caleb worked at the livery earning steady money. Leah took in sewing her nimble fingers, adapting from beadwork to threadwork with ease. Tocho thrived in school, making friends, losing some of his haunted look. Then one day Hernandez arrived with news. He found Caleb at the livery, pulling him aside with urgency. "Your sisters-in-law," he said quietly. "They're alive." Caleb's relief was overwhelming. "Where?" "Tucson still. Tula recovered, though she'll always have a scar from the bullet. Rena has been working for the doctor who treated her. Turns out she has a gift for healing." "Can we contact them?" "Too dangerous right now," Hernandez said. "McKenna is still looking for you all. He's convinced you helped the Apache escape. But I told them you're safe, that you've made a new life." "Thank you," Caleb said. "For everything." "My debt to Cochise is paid," Hernandez said formally. Then with his more usual manner, "But I've grown fond of you strange people. I'll keep watching, keep helping when I can." That night Caleb told Leah the news. She cried with relief, holding Toko as she explained that his aunts were safe. The boy cried too, and Caleb held them both, this family, built from loss and necessity and growing affection. "Someday we'll see them again," Leah said, "when it's safe." "Someday." Caleb agreed, though they both knew that day might never come. Winter came to Las Cruces with a gentleness that surprised Caleb after the harsh Arizona cold. The days remained warm enough to work outside, and the nights required only a single blanket. Their small rooms at Rosa's house had become a true home, filled with the quiet rhythms of their constructed family life. Tocho had been in school for 3 months now, and his transformation was remarkable. His English flowed naturally, his Spanish carried the proper Mexican accent, and he'd even begun to forget Apache words, much to Leah's hidden distress. She drilled him secretly at night, whispering the old language when they were certain no one could hear, desperate to keep some piece of his heritage alive. "Remember who you are," she would murmur in Apache as she tucked him into bed. "Remember your people." "I remember Shima," he would reply, using the Apache word for mother only in these private moments. But Caleb could see the strain it put on the boy, living 2 lives, being 2 different people. Sometimes Toko would start to say something in Apache, catch himself, and switch to Spanish mid-word. Each time it happened, a little more of his true self seemed to slip away. It was on a particularly mild December evening that everything changed. Caleb was returning from the livery, tired but satisfied with the day's work, when he saw a familiar figure standing outside Rosa's house. His blood froze. Sergeant McKenna, out of uniform, but unmistakably himself, was talking to Rosa at her front door. Caleb's first instinct was to run to grab Leah and Tocho and flee. But running now would confirm McKenna's suspicions. Instead, he forced himself to walk normally, to be Carlos Martinez returning home from work. "Ah, Carlos," Rosa called out, playing her part perfectly. "This gentleman is asking about lodging. I told him we're full, but he seems very interested in our neighborhood." McKenna turned and his eyes met Caleb's. There was a moment of recognition, quickly suppressed, but Caleb saw it. McKenna knew exactly who he was. Mr. Martinez, McKenna said politely, I hear you're from Sonora. Si, senor, Caleb replied in his practiced accent. Come for work for better life. And you found it here with your family? God has been good, Caleb said carefully. McKenna smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Family is everything, isn't it? Worth protecting at any cost. The threat was subtle but clear. McKenna knew, and he was letting Caleb know he knew. Well, McKenna said, tipping his hat to Rosa. Thank you for your time, Senora. I'll look elsewhere for lodging. He walked away, but Caleb knew he wouldn't go far. This was just the beginning. Inside, Leia was helping Tocho with his schoolwork. She looked up when Caleb entered, and her face immediately showed alarm at his expression. What happened? McKenna's here, Caleb said quietly. He found us. The color drained from her face. How? Does it matter? He knows. We run, Leia said immediately. Tonight. No, Caleb said, surprising himself with his firmness. Running confirms everything. We stay, we maintain our story, we give him nothing to prove. He could arrest us. On what charges? We're Mexican citizens living peacefully. He has no authority here, especially out of uniform. Caleb was thinking fast. He's not here officially. This is personal for him. That makes him more dangerous, Leia pointed out. She was right, but Caleb had realized something else. If he was going to arrest us, he'd have done it already. He wants something else. They spent a tense evening trying to maintain normalcy. Tocho sensed something was wrong, but didn't ask questions. He'd learned that survival sometimes meant not knowing everything. They ate Rosa's pozole in near silence, each lost in thoughts of what McKenna's presence meant. That night after Tocho was asleep, Caleb and Leia lay awake discussing options. They could run, but where they'd built something here, Tocho was thriving in school, they had income and community. Starting over again would be hard, maybe impossible. Maybe we should contact Hernandez, Leia suggested. He might know what McKenna wants. Too dangerous, Caleb said. Any contact with Hernandez now could expose him too. A soft knock at their door made them both freeze. Caleb grabbed his pistol, moving silently to the door. Who is it? Someone who wants to talk. McKenna's voice came through the wood. Peacefully. Just talk. Caleb looked at Leia, who nodded slightly. Whatever McKenna wanted, better to know than wonder. Caleb opened the door, keeping the pistol visible but not pointed. McKenna stood there alone, hands visible and empty. May I come in? No, Caleb said flatly. Talk from there. McKenna sighed. Fair enough. I know who you are, Warren. I know who she is. Apache woman, probably related to the ones who attacked our patrol. You're mistaken. Please, McKenna interrupted. Don't insult my intelligence. I've spent weeks tracking you. The Mexican cousin story was good, but not perfect. Little things gave you away. The boy flinched when he heard Apache words at the market. Your wife understands English better than she pretends. And you, Warren, you're no Mexican. Even if that were true, Caleb said carefully. What do you want? Justice, McKenna said, then laughed bitterly. Or what passes for it these days. 2 of my men died in that Apache attack. Good men with families. We had nothing to do with any attack, Leia said from behind Caleb. Maybe not directly, McKenna conceded. But you helped them escape. Harbored fugitives. Prove it, Caleb challenged. I don't need to prove it, McKenna said. A few words in the right ears and this whole Mexican family story falls apart. The boy gets taken to a reservation school. She goes to prison, or worse. You hang for treason. What do you want? Caleb repeated. McKenna was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was different. Tired. I want the killing to stop. I want to stop hunting women and children. I want to stop seeing Apache as enemies when they're just people trying to survive. It wasn't what Caleb had expected. Then why? Because I'm a soldier, McKenna said. I follow orders, but I'm also a man who's tired of this war. He looked past Caleb to Leia. Your people fought bravely, fought well, but it's over. The Apache have lost. We know, Leia said quietly. Do you really? Because there are still bands fighting still warriors thinking they can win. Every attack brings retaliation. More Apache die. More soldiers die. It never ends. What does this have to do with us? Caleb asked. You could help end it, McKenna said. Use your connections. Get word to the remaining fighters. Tell them to surrender. The terms won't get better. Every day they hold out, the terms get worse. We have no connections, Leia insisted. The traitor Hernandez says otherwise, McKenna replied. Oh, don't look so alarmed. He didn't betray you. But I'm not stupid. He helps Apache. You know Apache. Together you could save lives. By convincing them to give up, Leia said bitterly. By convincing them to survive, McKenna countered. The boy there, Tocho or Tomas or whatever you call him now, do you want him to grow up free or die young fighting a lost war? That's not fair, Pa, Caleb said. Nothing about this is fair, McKenna agreed. But it's real. Help me end this peacefully and I'll leave you alone. Your Mexican family story stays intact. The boy grows up safe. You live your lives. And if we refuse, Caleb asked, then I do my duty, McKenna said simply. I arrest you all. Let the system sort it out. We need time to think, Leia said. 24 hours, McKenna said. I'll be at the hotel. After he left, Caleb and Leia sat in stunned silence. The choice before them was impossible, betray the last free Apache or lose everything they'd built. We could still run, Caleb said. He'd follow, Leia replied. And now he knows our faces, our assumed names. We'd never be safe. If we help him, we become traitors to my people, Leia finished. But if we don't, Tocho pays the price. They talked through the night, going in circles, finding no good answer. As dawn approached exhausted and no closer to a decision, they were interrupted by urgent knocking. Rosa stood at their door, her face grave. There's a woman here. Apache. She's asking for you. Caleb and Leia exchanged alarmed looks. They followed Rosa to the kitchen where a figure in a hooded shawl sat at the table. When she looked up, Leia gasped. It was Rena, but not the Rena who'd left months ago. This woman was thin-scarred, her eyes holding new darkness. Sister, she said in Apache, then caught herself and switched to Spanish. I had to come, to warn you. Warn us about what? Leia asked, embracing her sister despite the danger her presence brought. The army knows about the remaining bands. All of them. Someone betrayed their locations. Rena's voice was hollow. They're planning a final campaign. Every Apache not on a reservation will be killed or captured within the month. How do you know this? Caleb asked. The doctor I work for, he treats soldiers too. They talk when they're in pain, say things they shouldn't. She looked at Leia with haunted eyes. Nantan is dead, killed last week. The others scatter like rabbits, but there's nowhere left to run. Tula, Leia asked urgently. Safe, hidden, but for how long? Rena pulled something from her bag, a leather pouch decorated with beadwork. Nantan gave me this before he died. Said to bring it to the grandson of Cochise. Said the boy would know what to do. Tocho had awakened and stood in the doorway, his eyes wide. Rena held out the pouch to him. What is it? He asked in Spanish, maintaining his role even now. Open it, Rena said. Inside was an eagle feather and a small piece of paper with writing in English. Tocho read it aloud. The eagle soars highest before the storm. The wise eagle finds shelter. The foolish eagle dies flying. Nantan's message, Rena explained. He says the storm is here. The last fighters must choose shelter or death. McKenna was right, Caleb said quietly. It's over. It's been over, Rena said bitterly. We just refused to see it. Leia told her sister about McKenna's offer, about the impossible choice they faced. Rena listened without expression, her scarred face giving nothing away. Do it, she said finally. What? Leia was shocked. Help the soldier. Save who can be saved. Rena looked at Tocho. He's the future, not the warriors hiding in the mountains. Every child like him who survives, who remembers, who carries the blood forward, that's victory now. You're saying we should betray our people. I'm saying our people are already betrayed. By time, by numbers, by weapons we can't match. Rena touched her scars. I got these trying to save a warrior who didn't want to be saved. He died cursing me for trying to help him. Honor and death were more important than life. The old ways, Leia began. The old ways are dead, Rena said flatly. We adapt or we disappear entirely. It was the hardest truth spoken by someone who'd paid the price for knowing it. Caleb saw Leia struggling, torn between loyalty to her people's past and her son's future. What would Cochise do? Tocho asked suddenly. Everyone looked at the boy. He stood straight, the eagle feather in his hand, looking older than his years. Grandfather tried to make peace when he saw war couldn't be won, Tocho continued. He signed treaties, moved his people to reservations when he had to, not because he was weak, but because he was smart. From the mouths of children, Rosa said softly from the doorway. She'd been listening, understanding more than they'd realized. You knew, Caleb asked her. I suspected, Rosa admitted, but I also know good people when I see them. What you are matters less than who you are. The decision when it came was Leia's to make. She was the Apache, the mother, the one with the most to lose. She looked at her son, her sister, her husband, and made the choice that millions of parents throughout history had made: survival over honor, future over past, children over principles. We'll help McKenna, she said quietly, but on our terms. They met the sergeant that evening in a small cantina on the edge of town. He came alone as promised and listened as Leia laid out her conditions. We'll send word through Hernandez to any Apache who will listen, she said. Come in peacefully, accept the reservation live. But in return, you guarantee safe passage. No punishment for past actions, no separation of families, and the children go to regular schools, not the military ones that try to kill the Apache in them. I can't promise all that, McKenna said. Then we can't help, Leia replied simply. McKenna was quiet for a long moment. I can promise to try. I have some influence, some friends who think like I do. The war needs to end, and if it ends peacefully, terms might be negotiable. Try isn't enough, Caleb said. It's all I have, McKenna replied. But think about this: without your help, those Apache will be hunted down anyway. With your help, at least they have a chance. And us? Leia asked. What happens to us? You remain the Martinez family. I destroy any records connecting you to Warren Ranch. As far as the Army's concerned, you never existed. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about the situation could be perfect, but it was the best they could hope for. Over the next weeks, word went out through Hernandez's network. The message was simple but powerful, especially coming from the grandson of Cochise. The war is over. Save yourselves for the future. Live to fight another day, even if that fight is just to remember, to preserve, to continue. Some Apache listened. Small groups began coming in, surrendering peacefully, accepting the reservation life they'd fought so hard to avoid. Others refused, choosing death over captivity. Each report of violence made Leia weep, but each peaceful surrender gave her hope. McKenna kept his word as much as he could. Families weren't separated. Some accommodations were made for traditional practices. It wasn't freedom, but it was survival. Rena stayed with them for a month before leaving to find Tula and bring her to Las Cruces. The sisters had decided to reunite to face whatever came together. When they returned, Tula was different, quieter, marked by her experiences, but determined to adapt like her sisters had. We survive, she said simply when Leia asked how she was. That's what Apache women do. They found a small house to rent near Rosa's, close enough to maintain the fiction of extended family. Tula and Rena became the widowed Ramirez sisters, more cousins from Sonora. The Mexican community accepted them with the same quiet understanding they'd shown Caleb and Leia: ask no questions, tell no lies, protect your own. Spring came early that year, bringing warmth and the railroad's arrival. The town boomed with new opportunities, and Caleb found better work with a freight company. Leia's sewing business grew as more wealthy families arrived, needing alterations and new clothes. Even Rena found work at a local clinic, her healing skills valued regardless of their origin. Tocho thrived in this new stability. He made real friends, learned to read and write with fluency, even began to forget that he'd ever been anything other than Tomas Martinez. It broke Leia's heart and filled her with relief in equal measure. One evening, as they sat on their small porch watching the sunset, Leia said something that surprised Caleb. "I want another child." He looked at her in shock. "What? A baby. Our baby. Tocho needs siblings and I—" She paused, searching for words. "I want to create life, not just preserve it." "Are you sure?" Caleb asked, his heart racing. "I'm sure about wanting to build a future," she replied. "With you." It was the closest she'd come to saying she loved him. Not the passionate declaration he might have wanted, but something deeper, a commitment to their shared life, to the family they'd become. That night, for the first time, their lovemaking was about more than duty or comfort. It was about hope, about creating something new from the ashes of their old lives. Summer brought news that made their sacrifice worthwhile. The last major Apache resistance had ended. Geronimo himself had surrendered, accepting deportation to Florida rather than death. The Apache Wars were officially over. "We helped end it," Leia said quietly when they heard. "We helped save lives," Caleb corrected, "on both sides." McKenna visited one last time before being transferred east. He looked older, worn by the weight of what he'd seen and done. "The Apache are on reservations now," he told them. "All of them. It's not fair, not right, but it's done." "And they'll survive?" Leia asked. "Some will. The strong ones, the smart ones, the ones who adapt." He looked at Tocho, who was reading a book in the corner. "The children will have the hardest time, but the best chance. They'll grow up between worlds, but at least they'll grow up." "Thank you," Leia said, and meant it, "for keeping your word." "Thank you, say," McKenna replied, "for helping end a war that should never have started." After he left, they never heard from him again. The Warren Ranch investigation was closed. The Mexican Martinez family's legitimacy never questioned. They were free to live their constructed lives. By autumn, Leia was pregnant. The news filled their household with joy and terror in equal measure. A baby would cement their new identities, but also create new vulnerabilities. A child who was truly Mexican-American, not Apache, pretending to be so. "What do we tell this child?" Leia asked one night, her hand on her growing belly. "About who we really are. The truth," Caleb said. "When they're old enough. They deserve to know their heritage, all of it." And Tocho, he knows. He'll always know, even if he has to hide it. But maybe his children or their children won't have to hide. "You think the world will change that much?" "It has to," Caleb said. "It always does eventually." Winter came again, mild and peaceful. Their small house was full of life, Leia and Caleb, Tocho, Rena, and Tula in their attached rooms, and soon a baby. The Apache sisters had become Mexican women so thoroughly that sometimes even they forgot who they'd been. But at night, when the house was quiet, Leia would whisper Apache lullabies to her unborn child. Tocho would practice writing Apache words in secret, keeping a hidden journal of memories. Rena would mix traditional healing herbs with Mexican remedies. Tula would bead patterns that looked Mexican but carried Apache meanings. They survived by adapting, but they preserved by remembering. The baby came with the spring a daughter. They named Maria Socorro Martinez Mary Help, a properly Catholic name that no one would question. But in whispered Apache, she was also Ayana, after the cousin who died protecting her children. Tocho was instantly devoted to his sister, protective, in a way that reminded Caleb of how warriors must have once protected their tribes. The boy was growing fast, losing his childhood to responsibility, but gaining strength that would serve him well. "She'll never know hunger," Tocho promised as he held the baby. "Never know fear like we did." "No," Leia agreed. "She'll have different challenges, growing up between worlds, never fully belonging to either." "She'll belong to us," Caleb said firmly. "To this family. That's enough." As spring turned to summer, life settled into rhythms that felt almost normal. Caleb worked, Leia raised children, and sewed, Rena healed people. Tula had begun teaching Spanish to other immigrant children. They were contributing members of their community, unremarkable in their quiet prosperity. Then Hernandez brought news that changed everything again. "There's a movement," he told them quietly. "Educated Apache, some who went to the white schools. They're working to preserve the culture, writing down stories, songs, traditions. They need people who remember, who can teach." "It's too dangerous," Caleb said immediately. "Not anymore," Hernandez said. It's being done legally through universities and museums. They want to preserve Apache culture before all the elders die. Leia looked at her children, Tocho reading in English, Maria sleeping peacefully in her cradle. We're not elders. We're barely adults. But you remember, Hernandez insisted. And more importantly, you've successfully bridged both worlds. You could teach others how to survive while preserving. It was tempting and terrifying. To officially acknowledge their Apache heritage would risk everything they'd built, but to help preserve their culture for future generations. Think about it, Hernandez said. The offer stands. That night the family debated. Rena was against it. They'd sacrificed too much to risk exposure now. Tula was curious, but cautious. Tocho surprisingly was the most adamant. We should do it, he said with conviction beyond his years. Not now, maybe not for years, but someday. When it's safer, when Maria is older, we have to help preserve what we are. You mean what we were, Rena corrected. No, Tocho said firmly. What we are. We're still Apache, even dressed as Mexicans, even speaking Spanish. The blood doesn't lie. Leia looked at her son with pride and sorrow. He understood the burden he carried to be a bridge between worlds, a keeper of memory, a hope for cultural survival. Someday, she agreed, when the time is right. That someday felt far off as summer rolled on. There were more immediate concerns, Maria's first fever that terrified them, Tocho's excellence in school that drew unwanted attention, Rena's growing reputation as a healer that brought questions about her training. They navigated each challenge carefully, their Mexican identity like armor protecting the Apache hearts beneath. Sometimes the armor felt too heavy, too constraining. Sometimes they almost forgot they were wearing it. It was Caleb who struggled most with the deception, ironically. The Apache women had grown up knowing they were different from the dominant culture, but he'd never had to hide who he was before, never had to deny his heritage or change his name. You could reclaim your identities, Leia told him one night. Say you're American, that Carlos was just a nickname. And risk exposing you never. We're stronger now, established. The community knows us. The community knows the Martinez family, Caleb corrected. That's who we need to stay. But he wondered sometimes what they were teaching their children, that survival required deception, that safety meant hiding, that love meant sacrifice of self. Were these the right lessons? Then he would see Tocho helping other immigrant children with their English, see Maria taking her first steps in their small garden, see the Apache sisters laughing together over some shared joke, and he knew that survival itself was the lesson. They were alive together, building something from nothing. August brought an unexpected visitor. Father Miguel from Prescott arrived older and grayer, but with the same knowing eyes. I'm traveling to Mexico, he explained, but I wanted to stop here to see how my former parishioners were doing. The threat was subtle, he knew who they were where they were, but as he stayed for dinner, it became clear he wasn't there to expose them, but to offer something else. The church is establishing schools, he said. Real schools, not the military ones. For Indian children, teaching them academics while allowing them to maintain their culture. We need teachers who understand both worlds. He was looking at Leia as he spoke. Someone who could teach in English and Spanish, who understands native ways but also modern requirements. I'm just a Mexican seamstress, Leia said carefully. Of course, Father Miguel agreed. But if you ever wanted to be more, the opportunity exists. After he left, Leia was quiet for days. The offer represented everything she wanted, a way to help Apache children without exposing her own. But it also meant visibility, scrutiny risk. We could move, Caleb suggested, to wherever this school is, start fresh again. We can't keep running and starting over, Leia said. At some point, we have to stop and really live. Then we stay here and you teach locally. There are Indian children here too from various tribes. As a Mexican woman, as a woman who understands suffering and survival, Caleb said, isn't that what matters? The decision was made for them when Maria fell seriously ill. The fever that had scared them before returned with vengeance. For 3 days they thought they would lose her. Rena used all her healing knowledge, both Apache and Mexican. They even brought in the American doctor, desperate for any help. It was Tula who saved her in the end, remembering an old Apache remedy their grandmother had used. a specific combination of herbs applied in a particular way with certain words spoken, not quite prayer, not quite medicine, but something between. Maria's fever broke on the fourth day. She would live, but the experience had changed them all. They'd nearly lost her while debating about preserving culture. Now they understood that preservation meant nothing without life itself. "We stay," Leia declared when Maria was fully recovered. "We live as the Martinez family. We raise our children safely, and privately, secretly, we keep our Apache hearts alive. That has to be enough." It was enough for a time. The years began to flow with the rhythm of normal life. Tocho grew into adolescence, brilliant and conflicted, equally comfortable in Mexican English, and secretly practiced Apache. Maria grew strong and fearless, a child who knew only love and safety. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a spring day 3 years after Maria's birth, addressed to Carlos Martinez, but written in Apache. Caleb couldn't read it, but Leia went pale as she translated. "It's from a woman named Lozin," she said. "She says she's Cochisa's sister, Tocho's great-aunt." "That's impossible," Caleb said. "All of Cochisa's family is dead or on reservations." "Apparently not." Leia continued reading. "She's been living as Mexican for longer than us. Married a Mexican rancher years ago. She heard about a boy in Las Cruces who looks like her brother's grandson. How could she know? The same network that helps Apache survive. Hernandez's network probably, though he might not even know it." Leia finished the letter. "She wants to meet Tocho, to pass on family history before she dies." It was dangerous. Any contact with other Apache increased their risk of exposure. But it was also an opportunity for Tocho to learn about his heritage from someone who'd known Cochise personally. "We have to go," Tocho said when they told him. He was 14 now, tall for his age, with his grandfather's strong features. "I need to know." The meeting was arranged for neutral ground, a small church halfway between Las Cruces and the ranch where Lawson lived. They traveled as the Martinez family on a religious pilgrimage, a cover story that explained their journey. Lawson was ancient, easily in her 70s, but her eyes were sharp as obsidian. She looked at Tocho and began crying. "You have his face," she said in Apache. "My brother's spirit lives in you." For hours, she talked while Tocho listened with rapt attention. Stories of Cochisa's childhood, his rise to leadership, his struggles to protect his people, but also personal stories, how he laughed, what foods he loved, the songs he sang to his children. "He would be proud," Lozin told Tocho. "You survive, you adapt, you remember. This is victory." She gave him something before they parted, a small turquoise stone that Cochise had carried. "Keep it hidden," she advised, "but keep it always." The journey home was quiet, each of them processing what they'd learned. Tocho held the stone like a talisman, connecting him to a grandfather he'd never met but whose legacy he carried. "I want to tell Maria," he said suddenly, "when she's older, about all of it. She deserves to know." "She will know," Leia promised, "when the time is right." That night, as they returned to their small house in Las Cruces, Caleb stood in the doorway watching his family. Leia was putting Maria to bed, singing a lullaby that sounded Spanish but carried Apache rhythm. Tocho was writing in his journal, recording Lozin's stories before they faded. Rena and Tula were preparing the evening meal, their movements synchronized by years of shared survival. This was victory, Caleb realized. Not the dramatic last stand of warriors, not the preservation of territory or traditional life, but this a family surviving, adapting, remembering. Children growing up safe, if not entirely free. Culture preserved in whispers and hidden journals. Love transcending the boundaries of race and loss. "Papa," Maria called out, using the Spanish word but with inflection that was purely her own. "Tell me a story." Caleb went to his daughter, this child who was Apache and Mexican and American all at once, and began telling her a story about eagles, how they soared highest before storms, how wise eagles found shelter, how even in shelter they never forgot how to fly.